Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? My name is Debbie. Welcome to my channel. We are watching the Widow's Words murder trial, Iowa v. Karina Cooper. She is accused of pew-pewing her husband in the face while he was sleeping downstairs in his recliner. She was having an affair with a man half her age. He is also accused of being her co-conspirator. His trial starts next month. Hopefully it is live streamed. If it is, we will be covering that one as well. Hopefully he won't take a deal. I feel like he might, but that's just my opinion. If he's smart, I would think that he would. But then again, I don't know. Because it looks right now like she did it all herself. But the text messages between these two are pretty damning. So, I don't know. They had, is it 3 kids or 4 kids? They had kids. Like, she's in her 40s. This guy's 22 at the time. Stupid. It just stupid. 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 Get a divorce. Get a divorce, people. Don't do this. Stupid. Hey, Judy. Hey, Terry. Hey, Jill. Let's see what Judy has for us on this case. According to Cedar Valley Crime Stoppers, this investigation is still ongoing, and they are offering a $17,000 reward for information regarding this case. How is it still ongoing? How? Well, it's okay to be a cougar. That's not the part I have a problem with. I don't, if you, good for you. I mean, men do it all the time. I don't have a problem with that. Get a divorce. Get a divorce. Do not. And she did it with the kids in the house. Kids in the house. No. 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 Number 1, you got your boy toy. Good for you. Divorce the husband. Let him have the kids for a week at a time and go play with your boy toy. Okay? Now, no daddy to take the kids. You got to take the kids with you. Now you got childcare issues. You can't just go off with your boy toy and have fun. Just saying. Like, I believe in the Institute of Marriage. I don't like divorce. I don't like people that are just like, oh, I'm done with you. Like, marriage is work. Marriage is hard work. I've been married for almost 20 years, okay? I know marriage is work. You have to get up every morning and decide. You have to make the decision to love your spouse every day. It's hard work. There are days that I'm just like, why did I marry this man? Why? And then he does something that's so sweet and so endearing that it just cancels out the crap, right? You have to make the decision to just love the good and just
All right, good morning, everyone. Go ahead and have a seat.
forget the bad. You just, it's hard work. And and if you can't do that, you get a divorce. Well, nursing school was the hardest thing that I've ever done. Um, well, no, I take that back. Chemo was the hardest thing, then nursing school, then marriage. But yeah, get a divorce. I don't understand. And you know what happens to an insurance policy if they find out that you unalive them? You don't get the money, and then you spend the rest of your life in prison. It's not worth it.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Good to see you, and I hope you all had a good night. We are back on the record. We have counsel and parties present, and you may recall we let go a little bit early yesterday because we moved fairly quickly and got through all the witnesses the state had available yesterday. And I believe the state now has a witness here ready to go. Mr. Ringel, do you have a witness to call for the state?
Yes, Judge. The state would call Ken Martin.
Good morning, sir. Come on up here to the chair to my left, if you would, or far left.
Do you pay it back?
Sir, that microphone's got a little button at the bottom of it. There you go.
If you go to
Yeah,
prison,
you can adjust it however you like.
Whoa.
Sure.
So she has to pay that money back? She's going to be in prison. How does she pay it back?
Right. And first thing I'm going to do, sir, is swear you in. If you please raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving in these proceedings will be the truth?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right. And then, sir, for the record, can you please provide us with your first name and your last name and spell
Sure.
them
My
for me?
first name is Kenneth, Kenneth. Last name Martin, Martin.
All right. Mr. Ringel?
Thank you, Judge. Morning, Mr. Martin.
Morning, sir.
Sir, how are you employed?
Presently, I'm employed with Bevel Gardner and Associates as a forensic analyst since 2007. I'm also employed by the Boston University School of Medicine as an adjunct instructor in their forensic program, graduate forensic program. And I just took a position as an adjunct instructor with Oklahoma State University in their forensic program.
What are you doing for Bevel Gardner?
As a forensic analyst, I conduct trainings across the country in the area of bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene reconstruction, crime scene processing. I also receive cases from not only the U.S., but from internationally as well, both for the prosecution and defense. So I'll review the case. In some instances, I'll testify. Also in civil cases as well, I'll review cases and provide testimony if necessary.
You said you're also employed as an adjunct professor.
Yes, sir.
What are you doing as an adjunct professor?
Both at Boston University and Oklahoma State University, I'll be teaching a course in bloodstain pattern analysis.
Could you describe your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, a master's degree in criminal justice, and I'm presently a PhD candidate at Oklahoma State University.
Could you outline for the jury your training and experience?
As far as training, I have attended numerous courses. I started, as far as attending courses, in 1980 I joined the Massachusetts State Police, where I spent a year and a half on the road. Essentially, the Massachusetts State Police is a little bit unique in that we handle all of the law enforcement capacity across the state, in that the district attorney, we call them district attorneys, you call them county prosecutors here, the Attorney General's office, we essentially have persons assigned there. Likewise, Logan Airport, even for the medical examiner, we supply all the forensic services. So again, I started in 1980. In 1982, I ended up going to the Bristol County District Attorney's Office, where I spent 9 years there as an investigator. And basically, we investigate all homicides throughout the state, any sudden unattended deaths. Basically, by statute, the district attorney's in charge of all cases. That's where I first started forensics, my forensic training. Ultimately, in '92, I wrote a letter to the agency, my department, and said we need to reorganize. Based upon that, they created what's called the Crime Scene Services section. I spent the tenure of the rest of my career there, which was almost 33 years, not only within the section, but also in charge of the section. And I spent 7 years at the medical examiner's office. Again, we supply all the forensic services. So all the forensic services entail processing bodies for latent print evidence, hairs and fibers, trace evidence. Not only that, but I had the duty of where it's the medical examiner's office amongst the teaching hospitals. As the residents would cycle through, I would also do training with them regarding crime scene processing, blood stain analysis, for their part of their education.
Outside of your work as an adjunct professor and what you've just outlined, do you engage in any additional training or teaching?
Again, I belong to various organizations, forensic organizations, so I annually attend meetings of these organizations. For example, the International Association for Identification. Excuse me. I was actually the president from 2007 to 2008. With the International Association for Identification, I'm certified as a senior crime scene analyst, bloodstain pattern analyst, as well as a footwear analyst. I also belong to the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts, as well as the Association of Crime Scene Reconstructionists. And each one of those organizations has an annual meeting that I will attend, either one or multiple during the year.
Do you publish?
I've published in the past. I've published an article regarding latent prints and how latent prints can transfer onto various surfaces in the reverse position. I've also published with the Boston University Engineering Department in 2 areas of bloodstain pattern analysis, looking at the length of the tail of a bloodstain, and also on, it's called micro-coatings on a surface, which essentially you could literally get a blood droplet to bounce off of a surface if you had the proper coating on there.
You have a CV, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Judge may approach.
You may. And to the extent you want to come up again with this witness, you don't need to ask.
I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 14. Do you recognize that?
Just a minute, please. Yes, sir, I do.
And is that your CV that fully outlines your training, experience, and educational background?
Yes, sir, it does.
My stipulation of the parties is state and include the United States exhibit number 14.
Any
That's correct.
objection?
No objection.
All right. Exhibit 314 is admitted.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Martin, you're here to testify about bloodstain pattern analysis, correct?
And reconstruction, yes, sir.
Have you prepared a demonstrative exhibit that outlines the basics of bloodstain pattern analysis?
Yeah.
Would that assume,
Sure, it would.
Judge, with permission of the court, I would request to publish the demonstrative exhibit just referenced.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
Presumably you can see that okay, correct?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, so what is bloodstain pattern analysis?
Just, would you back up a moment, please, just to the introductory slide? I'd like you to take note of here, that happens to be a right hand, but also we can see, essentially, this is an artist's rendition of an injury to an index finger, and we can see 3 droplets of blood as they're falling due to gravity towards the, in this particular case, towards the ground. So essentially, when we take a look at bloodstain pattern analysis, it's the scientific study of blood in motion in flight. Basically, we're talking about fluid dynamics, which is a subdivision of fluid mechanics. And what we look for is the size, shape, and the distribution of the stains, the resulting stains. Because what's interesting about bloodstain pattern analysis is that it's reproducible and predictable. In other words, blood will act or react from a force in a predictable fashion. In other words, if I were to place some blood in my hand, blood is a fluid. Basically, it's a liquid. Fluid encompasses both gases and liquids. If I were to place some blood in my hand, it's a liquid. If I were to slap it in this fashion, well, I can tell you right now, it's going to react in a predictable manner. This is called impact, so as I impact it, it's going to radiate out. So depending on the stains that are left behind, we can go back, and based upon the size, shape, distribution, and the location of the stains, we can identify the mechanism. In this case, it's a impact spatter. So from the mechanism, we can tell, or we're able to deduce what type of implement may have been used or what caused this type of event to occur.
And so what is crime scene reconstruction then?
Now, reconstruction is slightly different in that reconstruction involves bloodstain pattern analysis. In fact, I look at bloodstain pattern analysis as a lesser included discipline because overall, crime scene reconstruction holistically looks at the scene and what we have for evidence. So not every scene includes bloodstain, but we do have bloodstain if we need it. Shooting incident reconstruction is another subdiscipline which is included in crime scene reconstruction. Not only that, but we look at medical legal death investigation, in that if I were to look at a case and say I have some type of arterial spurt, you may have heard the term, first of all, I need to know that there's some type of artery breach in order to create that arterial spurt. Not only that, but we have to have some knowledge of basic crime scene. In some instances, you can go back and retest evidence, again, to get some indication as to, number one, is it blood? Whose blood could it be? So you have to have an overall understanding of the forensic sciences and what you can do or can't do. And then lastly, you have to have a methodology, because all scientific disciplines have a methodology involved in which you can actually look at all of the evidence. And that's the one thing in crime scene reconstruction. Ultimately, you have to consider all of the options. You know, many times you hear the term bias and that you're only looking at, or you're looking at information that you shouldn't. Well, ultimately, that gets to a point in crime scene reconstruction where we have to entertain all possibilities. And let's just say we have 10. Through the examination of the evidence, we may be able to eliminate 7. We may be left with 3. And of those 3, one of them may be the most likely possibility or the most likely occurrence that happened to have created what we have as far as the resulting scene. Now, the other interesting thing here, and I have a photograph, it's a photograph that I prepared. We have a diagram on the left, and what you have to remember about bloodstain pattern analysis, it's different than most of the other forensic disciplines if you think about it. And I'm sure maybe you've seen some type of show where you get square over the evidence. You have to be perpendicular when you take your photo. We're looking at the north wall, the east wall. Well, in my diagram here on the left-hand side, if you notice in that lower right corner, I have some red, and those are to illustrate so-called bloodstains which are left behind. Well, in the case that I have here, bloodstain evidence is different in that, in this case, and let's just say north is at the base of the diagram here, so that would be west on your left. Here we have a pattern that extends across from the west wall across the north wall. So my point is, we're looking at not only one wall, but we have to encompass or take in the entirety of the scene. So one of the biggest mistakes is that people focus on a small area when you need to back up and look at the big picture. So what I'm saying here is we process a scene, we need to, again, look at the scene three-dimensionally. Now, on the right-hand side, these are 2 photos that I took that when you look at photographs, as I did in this case, or if we have videos, you need to look at all of the photos. And the reason being, and let's just see, this is the typical laboratory photo you would see when clothing gets submitted to the lab. I think you would agree, it appears that I put the scale, that's called ruler tape in there, so we see the tape. And basically what I'm trying to note here, those could be potentially blood stains. So initially they appear to be on the front of the garment. Now, when the person puts on the garment, if you notice, the stains are actually on the side of the garment, or on the side of the wearer. So we need to be very careful. And so one of the things that we need to do is to look at any and all photos available, any videos available, autopsy photos. So again, the photographs, especially if you don't get a chance to go to the scene, and even at that, if you go to the scene, many times the victim may have been already removed from the scene. So what I'm getting at is we have to look at everything. A good example right here, if I were to take a photograph here, arguably my fingers are, let's just say, 10 inches apart, but depending on how I hold my fingers and take that photograph, because a photograph essentially is a two-dimensional format trying to depict the three-dimensional scene. So in that photograph, my fingers appear to be 2 inches apart, two-dimensionally, but when you look at them, when I twisted them around, they're really 10 inches apart. So again, we need to consider all of the evidence.
And just to be clear, the image that we see both on the left and the two images on the right of the garment that you referenced, those are not related to this case in any way?
Not at all. No, these are just generic images, just to understand what we're looking at.
What are we seeing here?
Well, what we have is essentially some blood, and you can see here that blood is an interesting, it's a fluid, so essentially it has to obey the laws of fluid dynamics. But how it's comprised, roughly 55% is plasma, and also we have the 45% of formed elements, which are red cells, white cells, and platelets. And based upon that, certain things do happen. For example, blood, the viscosity of blood is greater than that of water. You've heard the term blood is thicker than water. So there's some various aspects to this which is exclusive to blood. Not only that, for example, platelets are involved in the clotting process, which is very important too, because ultimately, sometimes before blood can dry, or many times, it will actually clot prior to it drying, and platelets have a major role in the clotting of blood.
A couple of terms that you use there, obviously you're applying scientific principles to the study of blood and blood stain patterns. You mentioned fluid dynamics. What is, just generally, sort of a layperson's understanding or explanation of what fluid dynamics is?
Fluid dynamics is just
There was a weird feedback noise.
fluid in motion,
It quit,
okay?
I think.
And again, fluids, just to make it
Nope,
clear,
it goes again.
liquids of fluids, likewise air. And the only
It's coming from the court, though.
thing I would say to that is that here I have a droplet that's falling. Air is a fluid, so it has to make its way through the fluid, just like a boat has to make its way through the water. There's the two things, or the two major factors when a droplet falls, is aerodynamic drag pushing up on the droplet, just to make that.
And so,
Just apologizing for the noise. I'm not sure what it is. You may hear that. I know that they're doing a little work on our air conditioning equipment here. That's, you may have noticed it's a little warm in here, has been. We have a very old air conditioning system in this building. I know they're doing a little work on it today, so that may be it, but I don't know. But just apologizing for the little background hum you hear. Sorry, Mr. Engel, go ahead.
thank you, Judge. So you're applying scientific principles to the study of blood.
Yes, sir.
All right. I believe this is animated, is that correct?
Yeah, and if you think back to that first slide that I had, we had the droplets, literally, and if I were to prick my finger and I tried to recreate that, and we had those droplets. Well, this is an actual droplet of blood falling from a finger, and basically this is high-speed video, and I'm sure you've seen that. In this particular case, we have 1,000 frames per second as this droplet. What happens is the droplet begins to amass on the tip of the finger, and ultimately gravity is always pulling down. So ultimately, gravity, as it's pulling down, the mass of that blood, what's going on here is there's cohesive, in other words, there's an attraction between the blood and the finger, and there's also something called surface tension. It's holding the blood together, and as that blood amasses, it just can't hold on anymore, and it pulls away. And what you saw in the initial video is that droplet. Well, here's actually what happens, because once it pulls away, you never really see what happens, but I have it here. If you notice, here the droplet, that's called a ligament. It begins to stretch out. But interestingly enough, once that snaps, once it pulls away, if you notice, the droplet immediately becomes a sphere, or, for another term, a ball. And basically, that's what happens. All liquids are going to assume that sphere or ball shape, and that's why it's predictable and reproducible. Because, again, it's following the laws of fluid dynamics. If you noticed, there's a couple things. There's a little bit of, it's called oscillation, is the droplet. In fact, if you've ever thrown a water balloon, sometimes you get this going on by the water balloon. Well, it dampens itself down and ultimately assumes that sphere. But ultimately, as that ligament pulls, if you notice, there's a little follow-on or accompanying droplet that forms because it's almost like an elastic. It snaps because that surface tension pulls that droplet back together.
And I'm going to ask you to slow down just a little bit for our court reporter's sake. All right. Moving on to the next slide. What are we seeing here? I think you just referenced surface tension.
Sure. So this is a photograph that I took. I took a pipette, basically a dropper, okay, and I had some blood in it. And here I have a piece of foam. So what I did was very carefully try to put the droplet onto the foam because, as I mentioned before, blood wants to stay together. It doesn't want to separate. It wants to hold itself together, and surface tension does hold it together in that sphere or ball. And again, what I did very carefully was put it down on the foam, and you would think, if I asked you beforehand, that the blood would just flow through there. No, if you're very careful, there's the actual droplet sitting on top of the foam. So again, it wants to stay together unless it's acted upon by some type of outside force.
And again, this is the application of the concepts of fluid dynamics to blood and, again, blood stain pattern analysis, correct?
Yes, sir.
And essentially, it's physics. These are the principles of physics.
Yes, sir.
All right, what are we seeing here?
So before we start the slide, there are two slides which go together. The first slide is a smooth cardboard surface, and it's roughly 100 centimeters. So 100 centimeters, that's roughly 39 1/3 inches, so roughly 40 inches off the ground. What they've done in these high-speed videos is they've let a droplet of blood go. And ultimately, gravity is going to pull it down to the ground, and this surface, that cardstock or that cardboard. But what we're looking at here, or the purpose of the two slides, is surface texture. In other words, the surface that it strikes is going to, for the most part, govern what the droplet looks like. So in other words, you'll see here on a smooth surface, it's going to assume that circular shape. Whether I drop it at 10 feet, 100 feet, it's going to come down. If that surface is smooth, you're going to get that circular shape. Likewise, if I have a rough surface, it's going to break up. Think about it. It's hitting that rough surface, so basically it's going to break up. So the first one is hitting a smooth surface at roughly 40 inches. Notice what happens. It stays pretty much circular. And that's a typical drop that you might have on a smooth kitchen floor. In fact, the smoother the surface, glass, polished glass is probably the smoothest surface, you're going to get that nice circular stain. Now, if we move to the next slide, same 100 centimeters, roughly 40 inches, and what we have here is a blood droplet hitting, and you can see it off to the left-hand side. That's cement board that you could buy at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. Again, same height, same size droplet, and you'll see what happens. Major difference. And again, it's the surface texture that blood hits. Many times it was believed in the past that when you saw something like that, it's because the droplet hit the surface texture that the droplet, in this case, the cement board, which causes that breakup of the droplet. Now, what's important with this slide here is we saw those two previous slides, and again, this is cardstock. Now, this is something that I put together, and I have 10 through 80 degrees. And what we're looking at there, if I were to take blood right now and I were to drop it here on this countertop, that's 90 degrees. You would agree with me, right? Ultimately, it's going to fall and hit. That gives you that circular stain. As I change the angle, 10 degrees being the most acute, so 10 degrees is this, something like this, okay? So we see 10 degrees here. What's happening is the droplet, as it hits, basically that sphere or ball, it remains in that shape. So my example was if you were to go to Michael's or one of those home places where you can buy styrofoam balls, and I would take a piece of sandpaper, take a look at that 10 degree, as I would take that styrofoam ball, And if I slide it down, now remember, it's at 10 degrees, as I slide it down, at the midpoint of that styrofoam ball, it's going to be its widest, right? Likewise, as I continue to slide it, it's going to get back to its narrowest. And what that allows us to do is there's a relationship between the length of the stain and the width of the stain where we can go back and get what's called the impact angle. Now, this is looking at something like this, okay? If you look at my, excuse me, if you look at my arm, now we're talking about a surface like this, okay? 90 degrees. We're talking about 10 degrees. But on the other hand, we could do the same thing if I had a wall. Now let's just say this is my wall here. Remember I said if I do that? If I do this is impact. Well, when I do this impact, essentially, the blood that's coming out from between my hands, it's going to shoot straight out. So that's going to hit straight on, so that would be 90 degrees, correct? So if I hit something like this, it's going to force it out. Straight on is 90 degrees. If I hit it sufficiently and it starts to go up, because what's going to happen is it's going to be directed, say, upwards, because I have it directed upwards, you're going to start getting that stain going something like this. So my point is, even though I have a stain here, if I were to take a pool of blood, and let's just say I hit that with a hammer, I can tell you right now, I'll have some stains here, 90-degree circles, but I'll also have some climbing up, and the more they climb, the more elongated they come or become. The tail always points to where it's going. The tail points to where it's going. So in this instance, if you notice the tails are on the bottom, and as I told you before, I created that with a cardstock in this fashion, so we know I dropped it from above and it's going downward. But again, when we look at a scene, there are occasions when I actually have these elliptical stains going up a wall. So again, it's telling me tail's going up. It came from this direction. Not only that, but I can estimate or I can approximate the angle of what they call impact. So again, the shape of the stain is very important. Oh, I'm sorry. In this last photograph here, that's an example of the tail. If you notice, that green arrow goes down, and you can see the head of the arrow is in that downward position. So essentially, all of those stains are going downward. These two videos, one's taken straight on and one's taken from the side. And we can see on it's 2,000 frames per second. Basically, it's 10 degrees. So if we take a look in the middle, that cardstock, we can see that 10 degree, and I've put it in there. And what I want you to take a look at there as we play the left and then the right, remember I told you before, that sphere or that ball, as it skids along, it maintains its overall shape. It just paints it as it goes along. Or consider that styrofoam ball as it slides along. And you'll see here, if we play the left one, as that stain, notice as it hits, it maintains its shape. And ultimately, notice there's the tail. So again, it's maintained that shape. We have that ellipse. If I had to, I could measure they call that the leading edge at the top. I could measure the base of the stain, and I could actually estimate, or I could calculate the impact angle. In this particular case, it's 10. Now, in the right side, if we take a look at it, this is just to show you that it maintains its spherical shape as it skids along that surface. And again, why that's important, if I have a vertical surface, it's not uncommon to see stains. Think about it, is that spatter goes along that vertical surface. It's not straight on, so it's not circular. Instead, it's coming in at an angle. So when I look at those angles, it's going to tell me that that stain came in at an angle. It's not straight on. So I can position items. Think about that. Just one quick example. If I take a Coke can, which I've had numerous times, or a beer can, any type of can, cylindrical, right? It's round. If I have that on the table and I have something go on, let's just say I do this same thing. Well, that Coke can, where it directly faces that spatter coming in, I'll have circles. But on the sides of the Coke can, you say, well, why do I have these stains skidding along and I have these ellipses going this way? Well, guess what? Even though this one hits straight on, these are skidding along the side, so I get those elongated stains. And what that allows me to do, if you think about it, is position the can, because let's just say the can got knocked over, position the can as to where it was at the time of the event. The other important thing to remember is that the harder or the more force I impart on something, just a quick example, if I were to take two water balloons, if I take a bat, say I have a water balloon here, and I hit it just sufficiently enough to break that skin, and again, remember, blood, the surface tension, the blood itself is the skin, but in this case, I'm using the example of a water balloon, which is totally different than the water contained within. If I just hit it, what happens? It just kind of breaks up and will run down my arm for the most part, right? But think about it, if I take that same size water balloon, the harder I hit it, and let's just say I really wind up and hit that thing, what's going to happen? I've got, in this case, the term is spatter. I've got water all over the place, right? And the harder I hit something, the smaller the resulting stains. So again, one of the things that we look for, if you remember back to when I talked about it, size of the stain, shape of the stain, elliptical, circular, distribution. So again, the harder I hit something, the smaller. In this particular video here, what you're looking at is we talk about energy, or we talk about force. It happens to be a 20 caliber bullet striking a sponge. Things that, I'm sorry, but I'm just a little closer. One of the things that we take a look at is, if you think about it, a bullet, depending on what type of round I use, whether it's a 22 or a 45 or whatever, certainly. And what we have here is, this is a sponge, and when we teach the class, this is pretty much universal. We all use a sponge out there, because certainly that's really the best representation we have. But the point is, when you see this, when you take a look at the size of the stain, this is where it becomes mist-like. The best example I can give you is if you were to go to the dollar store and you buy one of those pump bottles and you fill it up and you press that as hard as you can, what happens? You're only going to get a little mist. And the other thing to remember with this misting is that the smaller the stain, the less distance it travels. So the smaller the stain, there's more energy to create these small stains. Likewise, they don't go very far, because again, go back to my example of that pump bottle from the dollar store. No matter how hard you push that, that little misting doesn't go very far, does it? And again, it deals with fluid dynamics, but again, the smaller the stain, the closer to the source you'll find the stain. So here we go here. This is 22, it's going right to left. Yeah, right to left. And what you have here is, you have, it's called forward spatter to the left. It's going with the bullet, so the predominance of the spatter is going to go forward. And likewise, what you also have is you have what's called back spatter too. So some of that blood, in this case on the sponge, is coming back towards in this case, the shooter or the barrel of the weapon. And depending on how close the barrel is, I've actually had cases where blood actually will get projected into the barrel itself. So depending on how far the weapon is away. But bottom line is, the greater the energy, in this particular case, what we're trying to do is replicate a gunshot. We can see that we have that little fine mist. And again, we know that fine mist is not going very far.
When are you gonna ask a question that is relevant to this case? It feels like he's just teaching a class. Which I get, we need a baseline understanding of blood spatter. But I'm bored now. Bored now. Jury is bored now. Time to ask a relevant question. You're losing the jury.
And I apologize for that, but, you know, old courthouses sometimes need repairs. So, all right. Mr. Ringel?
Thank you, Judge.
Apologize for what?
In this particular slide here, what I'm illustrating, it's called a drip pattern. Remember, we looked at the single droplet as it hits a surface, and again, surface texture has pretty much controls the appearance of the resulting stain. In this case, we've started with some blood on the surface here, this cardstock or this graph paper, and what I'm demonstrating or showing you here is as each additional droplet, in this case we just see one droplet, hits that existing pool, well, what ends up happening is you have the creation of what's called satellite spatter. And I'm sure you've maybe seen this even at home, say your sink is dripping, drip, drip, drip. What happens is with each subsequent drip, you have more satellite spatter radiating out. And what's important about this is as it radiates out, what I'm talking about in all directions, so 360 degrees, you have these small little spatter stains, very small, and that tells me that something above this pool or something above this pattern was there long enough to drip sufficiently to create these satellite spatter, which you'll see. So the droplet hits, and you can see all of the satellite spatter that are created. And with each additional droplets, what you'll have is a buildup of this satellite spatter around, they call that the parent stain, because everything radiates out or comes from the parent stain. So one of the things that we look for is that parent pool or that parent stain. When we see those radiating spatter, then we have that drip pattern that we're talking about.
Sir, do you have a laser pointer with you?
Yes, I do.
Would you be able to use that laser pointer to point out that parent pool and then the satellite stains that you were referencing?
So this would be the parent stain here. And again, once that droplet comes in and hits it, it creates all of these little satellite spatter. And again, if you notice, they're distributed pretty evenly if you drop it in the middle. If you were to drop it off to one side, again, not to get too into it, but certainly they're going to drip, you'll have satellite, but there may be a predominance on one side versus the other. But again, I see that radiating pattern around that parent stain. Again, this is an example. This was in one of the classes over at Boston University where the students create these various patterns. So here, this is on the concrete floor, and basically what they do is they drop blood. They drop 6 droplets here, and they drop them into the same stain if they can, and you can see the radiating spatter, satellite spatter around that stain. Notice how they all come out. If we look at them, for the most part, the tails will be pointing outwards. If we were to get in there and really look, the tails are pointing outwards. There are some exceptions because they don't really get a chance to settle down. Remember I talked about this going on when it's released? Well, ultimately, they may point slightly different. This is the vertical surface. So think about this. This is the floor. Here I'm dripping onto the floor. Now, envision this as a wall. So here I have a wall which is close by here. Notice what happens as this droplet, now when that droplet hits that parent pool, those little satellites come off, and again, they come up and they come down. They call it a parabolic arc, but just like throwing a ball. So what happens is if that vertical wall is close enough, I'm going to get those little stains before they hit the surface or the concrete or the floor. If that wall is close enough, as they go up, they're going to hit the wall. And depending where that wall is, those satellite spatters may not have reached their maximum height, so it may be very close, or they may be at their maximum height, or they may be down here as the stains are starting to fall down. But for example, if I were in a gymnasium, I wouldn't see this, but if I were in the corner of the gymnasium, I might see that. And again, it gives me an indication of where that event occurred. All right, so that's what we're looking for.
And when you say where that event occurred, what do you mean by event?
And I use a bloodletting event. In other words, in this particular case here, that could be someone dripping, standing, as I'm dripping down, because I'm standing close to the corner here. As I'm standing, I'm dripping, creating the satellite spatter, and again, close enough to the wall that I get that on that vertical or that wall surface. The other thing that we need to take a look at as well, and this is a definition, all the definitions that are contained here, there's actually a terminology that we use, and if you notice at the bottom, I footnote it's a terms and definition and blood stain pattern analysis. We all use the same terminology, but basically we have a pool, which is a blood stain resulting from an accumulation of liquid blood on a surface. Actually, it should state a non-porous surface for the most part, because it's non-porous when you have a pool. Because think about it, if I have a piece of cloth, ultimately that's going to saturate down, and that's called a saturation stain. But essentially a pool is what we have here, and this is, again, the pool's amassing. What we actually have in this particular slide here, at some particular point, once the blood, in this case, is deposited on the floor, you immediately get clotting that starts to occur. As blood sits there, again, remember I talked about the platelets and the I didn't talk about fibrin, but the blood will actually begin to clot. And at some point, you actually get the clotting going on here, and you get what's called serum separation, because that liquid begins to pull out as the red will pull themselves together. So that does give me some indication that that pool here was there for some amount of time. But again, time is very difficult because it depends on several factors, and I may say that again. Certainly the temperature has something to do with it. Certainly the humidity has something to do with it. The actual porousness of the floor may have something to do with it as well. So you have to be very careful about that. You'd have to replicate the conditions and know the conditions that you were in order to try to replicate that. Flow patterns, they don't seem very important, but they are actually extremely important. So essentially what we have is, this is a vertical surface, right? Because again, remember, gravity is pulling everything down. So what we have here is, this is an actual deposition of wet blood onto a vertical surface. And again, there's a sufficient amount of blood where it begins to run down, in this case, the wall. What's important with flow patterns, what we look at is, many times flow patterns can tell us if a victim were standing. Because if I incur some type of significant injury, gunshot or whatever, traumatic injury to my face, it's not uncommon to see blood flow going down my entire front of my body. Likewise, on the tops of my shoes or the tops of my feet. Let's just say I didn't have my shoes or socks on. Likewise, the other thing that we look at is we look at the bottoms of an individual's feet as well, because it's not uncommon for a victim to, say, struggle with their assailant where they're literally stepping in their own blood. So those are all things that we look at because it gives us an indication at some point the victim was never up or the victim was up, and if they were up, let's just say they have some flow pattern down to their knees, and then I have what appears to be a transfer, well, they were at least on their knees. So again, flow patterns are actually important when we take a look at cases. And again, another example, in this case here, how it relates, this is what we have here is a flow pattern. The victim is lying on their back on the floor, but this photograph here tells us, or tells me, that the victim was never up at the time that the wound was incurred, if you think about it. Wound is here on the chest. Ultimately, the blood is flowing down, because again, blood wants to flow down. Likewise, head up is up here, so this is the lower portion. So essentially, the victim was on the ground when they incurred that wound. Victim was never standing, but instead was on the ground. Transfer stains. Basically, what we have is a surface wet with blood. And if I were to take a surface such as my hand, wet with blood, well, what we've done up here is, this happens to be an implement, again, from one of the classes, but we go from left to right, and we go down to that second row. And what you find is, which makes sense, the top left is going to have the most blood on it, so Obviously, it's the heaviest concentration of blood, and as I move across, there's less and less blood that you find on the surface. And many times, and let's just say, and you'll hear me use these terms, a footprint or a footwear impression. A footprint is if I literally take my shoes and socks off, that's the friction ridge skin on the bottom of my foot. Just like we have palm prints, we have footprints. So that's if I have my shoes and socks off. You can literally identify a footprint because it has the same type of ridges that are contained on your palm. A footwear impression is if I have something covering my feet, whether it be some type of athletic shoe or whatever, where I transfer that information, okay, to a different surface. So just to clarify which is which, but again, what we usually find if we're looking at, say, footwear impressions, somewhere in between is the best. The heaviest one covers over some of the detail, and as we move along, usually you find them around the middle of the deposition is your best impression.
Is that the entirety of the demonstrative?
Yes, sir.
All right. Judge, we can take this down for now. So running through the demonstrative, you've talked about some of the basics of the science that you're applying in the work that you do. Can you talk to the jury a little bit about what methodology you utilize when you approach a scene for the purposes of analysis?
Sure. So again, well, when I approach a case, there are occasions where I go out to scenes, but when we look at a case, the first thing you want to take a look at are all the photographs, because again, you don't want any of that extraneous information. In other words, you don't want to read any witness statements. I don't look at any of those. You look at all the photographs, and again, if I have photographs, if I have videos, to get an idea of what type of patterns we have, because the first thing we have to do is identify the patterns, and then from there I'm able to get the mechanism, and then knowing what type of mechanism I have, then I know potentially what type of implements may have been used and what may have gone on. Something is from, say, a firearm to maybe even just my arm. Now think about it. I could have blood flowing down my arm as I do one of these things. That's called cast off. In other words, if I were to, and you do this probably in the morning when you take a shower, if you reach for that towel, that water comes off your hand, and basically it's going to be deposited in this, what we call a curvilinear. So again, it gives me an idea of what's going on when we identify that. So I'll look at all the photos. From there, I get an idea of what type of patterns I have. If we go back a while ago, I talked about projected patterns, and I'm doing this only because everyone realizes you have a carotid artery here. Well, it's possible during some type of aggression or whatever, that could be transected or whatever, it could be cut. And basically what you have is the literally pulsing of the heart as it's pushing the blood out. So here I have this curvilinear line. But before I go, or before I make a statement to say investigators that I have this arterial spurt, certainly I need to know from the medical examiner's records, and having worked in the medical examiner's office, that I have to have some type of artery, whether it's carotid, brachial, femoral, or even the radial artery. I have to know that that's been damaged.
So when you approach your work, whether it's looking at a case generally or looking specifically at a scene, sounds like you're looking initially at photographs. Mm-hmm. You're looking at videos as well, is that correct? The
videos, first officer on the scene videos. Many agencies now use the body cams as they're referred to. So I'll get copies of those, and I have software where I can literally go frame by frame. So essentially in 1 second of video, I can pull off 30 photographs. And then from there, again, autopsy, then I go to the lab reports to find what evidence was recovered. And based upon the evidence that was recovered, then look at the results of the examination. In other words, many times agencies will swab blood stains. And of course, it's important to know, first of all, that it's blood, right? Because it's not uncommon to have some other substance that may appear to be blood. Likewise, it's not uncommon. I've had instances where there's blood at the scene, but from a prior incident, not only from a prior incident, but from a prior individual. So again, if it's available, you need to look at that as well. And then from there, then I'll go through, sort my photos, I've identified my patterns, and ultimately come up with my hypothesis as to what happened, how the mechanisms, or what mechanisms were involved. And then once I get to the point where I've put all that together, I have my report there, but then for the reconstruction part, we have to consider any and all, whether it be officers' statements, what they believe they saw, because I've had the cases, I've had witnesses alongside a victim who were incorrect in what they thought they saw. So we obviously have to assess those as well when we consider what is the most likely possibility of what occurred or transpired.
You mentioned the body cams or the videos, and you also mentioned those videos of the first responding officers. Why is that important to the work that you do?
Because first responding officers, if you think about it, nothing has been touched there. Basically, the scene is pristine as you're going to get it. And I will say that many times, whether it be, sometimes first responders, when I say first responders, EMS will get there prior to, and of course, they're going to assess the victim. Sometimes they've captured that on body tape, body cams, but then they can take some notes as to who did what. But again, that's as close as we're going to get to say, a pristine scene.
You mentioned one of the things that you're looking for initially is trying to make a determination of the mechanism, is what you referenced. What did you mean by mechanism?
Well, again, if I have, let's just say I have photographs, and I have the autopsy photographs as well. I told you those are important. Well, if I have some type of incised wound or a cutting wound, okay, incised being longer than it is deep, but it's telling me that there's some type of sharp implement there. And again, if I have something where I have my spurt pattern, okay, I have some type of, say, a spurt where it may indicate some type of artery has been breached. Certainly now I go back to the autopsy report and look at the doctor's report to see if, in fact, what wounds I have. Likewise, if I have a cartridge case at the scene, fired bullet, I'm going to go back to the lab reports to see if they did an examination, what caliber it was, what was involved. Then I'm going to go over to the medical examiner. Do I have a penetrating wound? In other words, a penetrating wound is when the bullet goes in, but it doesn't exit. A perforating wound is when the bullet goes in and it exits. So again, that tells me there could be a bullet at the scene that they may not have recovered, or certainly considerations that have to be taken into account when you're evaluating the entirety of the scene.
Clearly, it's important to you to have an understanding of what caused the injuries. You talked also about the caliber of the bullet that was fired. Why would the caliber matter to you in the work that you do?
Again, not to get too technical, but certainly the mass of the bullet, size of the bullet has an effect, but it's actually the velocity of the bullet that has more of an effect. So again, if I have a high-speed 45 caliber bullet, that's certainly going to potentially do a lot more damage than, let's just say, I have a 22 shot round. Because again, what bullets are actually have a rating to them, feet per second, so that gives me an indication of what type of kinetic energy is involved. Because again, when such as a bullet hits something, there has to be a transference of some of that energy, and that's what causes, for example, remember I talked about before, that high speed. So if I have a round that's hitting me at 1,000 feet per second, when that round hits, some of that energy has to be dispersed. And the reason why they are so small is because the higher the energy, the only way a liquid can disperse it is by creating smaller stains, because that energy is actually dispersed across the number of stains created. So again, that's going to tell me what type of damage I have.
A perforating wound versus a penetrating wound, why is that important to your analysis specifically?
Well, of course. Well, again, remember, a penetrating wound, there's a potential of back spatter. I know that I'm not going to have, and we looked at it in the video, any forward spatter, right? Because the bullet never exited. So I could have some back spatter as a result of the actual bullet once it makes contact with the skin. That perforating wound, if I have a round that's coming in, and it comes in and it's actually going out, well, a lot of that energy is going to be expended or continue on with the bullet. So that's when I get that, could be even tissue that moves forward and continues to march. So again, why that's important to me, I've had that happen where when I go back, and let's just say I have a perforating wound, and I've had agencies miss the actual bullet itself, And what will happen is when I look at the photos, it's a perforating wound. Now I go back and look at the photos. I tell them that you missed a bullet because it went through and you didn't find the bullet. So again, you need to know that it tells you the dynamics of what potential you have.
If you're dealing with gunshot wounds, does the number of wounds matter to you, and if so, why?
Oh, yes, sure. And the reason being for, let's say, the number of gunshot wounds, I have an initial wound, and let's just say it's a penetrating, perforating wound, it doesn't really matter, it's going through. What that does for the second and subsequent shots, and I've had this happen, where it creates a pool, and let's just say and I'm using this only because it's easy to see, I'm in my face here, as the round comes through, I'm going to do some damage, and let's just say I do some damage to my jaw, and I'm going to have some bleeding going on, I have some saliva, but what that does is it creates a pool, because I'm bleeding, right, actively bleeding. When that second bullet comes in, it's going to create that pool that causes that, say, additional back spatter, because again, that energy's got to be released. And I've actually had the case where the second round created a tremendous amount of back spatter, because essentially, as the medical examiner referred to it, it was almost shooting into a mud pool, so it created this tremendous amount of back spatter.
We've gone through quite a bit of information. One of the things you are talking about and have talked about a little bit is back spatter. Talking specifically about gunshot wounds and a second gunshot wound, there potentially being more back spatter than with the first wound. Can you talk again, and I think the example that was used was the blood on the sponge with a .22 caliber bullet penetrating it. Can you just once again explain what back spatter is?
So here I have this sponge, this bloodied sponge. As the bullet strikes the sponge, well, what happens is part of the physics is equal and opposite reaction. Some of that energy, as that bullet hits, causes that spatter to be directed back. And if you recall, I've actually mentioned, I've had at least 2 cases where the gun was close enough where the spatter actually was inside the barrel of the gun, because it gets projected back, again, trying to dissipate that energy as it hits that initial side of that sponge prior to going through.
I understand that your answer is going to be it depends, but...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. It does depend.
Well, but my question for you is, how far can that blood spatter travel? So that back spatter, excuse me.
In the literature, they've talked about 4 feet, at least in some of the literature. There have been cases presented that are even further than 4 feet. I've had a case where it was as much as 8 feet, where there was some back spatter that was detected, actually with some tissue that was detected as well, not just back spatter.
And when you say tissue, I think it's fairly clear, but you mean biological material from the...
Such as skin or fat. Underneath the skin, you have a layer of what's called adipose, so fatty tissue that can actually be dislodged in either back spatter or forward spatter.
Before we talk about the work that you did specifically on this case, any other concepts that you think are important for the jury to understand that inform the work that you did here?
I did neglect to mention, I talked about transfer stains where I have something, wet with blood touching the surface. I may use 2 terms, and one of them being swipe and the other being wipe. Now, just to be clear, if I had some blood on my countertop at home, if I had the liquid on my countertop at home and I took a clean rag and I wiped through it, that's considered a wipe. So essentially, I have pre-existing blood that I wipe it away. A smear would be if I have a hand wet with blood or paint or whatever, and I come across a clean surface, that's a swipe. So a transfer is just something where I contact the surface, and I'm not sure, there's no motion associated with it. But if I have motion associated with it, many times I can tell that it was pre-existing, so I have a wipe, or it wasn't pre-existing where maybe my hand, I have an injury. I was putting it on the side of my face to try to stem the flow of blood, and then I just happen to touch this and as I'm moving across the surface. So that would be the swipe. Again, something bloody, it has to obviously wet with blood, comes across that surface where I deposit the blood on that surface.
We moved through this pretty quickly, but one of the concepts that you discussed, I think when we were looking at a blood pool, was the concept of clotting. Can you explain what clotting is and the factors that affect clotting?
Again, clotting, once the blood once you lose blood or once your circulatory system is breached, the blood, it's a natural occurrence that wants to fix itself. So the clotting mechanism takes over. So when we lose blood outside, and let's just say we have some type of criminal offense, and I have blood which is deposited as you saw in that slide, well, that same mechanism takes over. Okay, the platelets start to pull themselves together, the red cells start to pull together. There's fibrin, it's a stringy material which pulls all of the cellular material, the white cells, the red cells, and whatever, and that's what leaves you with the serum, that yellow liquid that you see, that straw-colored, that ultimately pulls together. And there have been some studies out there, and one of them that's used many times is the Lee White study. And basically what they do is, and now this is clinical in a hospital, 3 to 15 minutes. Now that's in a hospital where they took some blood, placed it at 37 degrees, which is 98.6, in a water bath, just to see it as it clots, because again, it was blood that was taken from an individual's arm. When we talk about a scene, that can vary dramatically, because we have to think about the absorbency of the surface that it's on. We have to think about the temperature. We have to think about the humidity that's out there. We also have to think of even a pool. Now let's just take this is a porous surface, this is a carpet, so it would saturate down, but let's think about, say you had a linoleum floor at home. That floor may appear to be flat, but you may have little dips in there. So here I have this area where the blood could pool up. Just that little area where it dips, that could affect the clotting of the blood as well. So we really have to take all of that into consideration. So again, for the most part, you can't say with any degree of accuracy that 5 minutes and 37 seconds. No, it doesn't happen. What you look for is overall, again, holistically, what we look at, remember I talked about clotting, but not only do we have clotting, but we have drying. So ultimately, we need to look at all of that. In the entirety of the scene, how does the scene look? You know, is it just a little bit of clotting here? Is there overall drying of the scene and clotting of the scene? So again, that's why we need to look at the entirety of the scene.
I think you referenced that clinical study. You said in that clinical study, the minimum amount of time was 3 minutes, and you said up to 15 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes.
You just mentioned drying. Is there a difference between blood drying and the concept of clotting?
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, blood drying, essentially blood could dry before clots or fully clots. Again, drying is when all the moisture evaporates from it. So as I mentioned before, clotting is really the drying process. It's just that the blood is present long enough where all of the cellular material begins to pull together and you have that leaching out of the serum onto whatever surface you're on. In fact, it goes so far as clotting can actually occur on clothing as well. And it could be for a number of reasons. It could be because of the presence of blood, just clarify that, or it could be the perpetrator came back sometime after the crime and did some type of action that caused clotting on the victim. And let's just say I moved the victim or whatever and I picked up clots as they were forming and say I wiped it out on my shirt or whatever. So there is a possibility of sources for clotting to appear on clothing, whether it be the suspect's clothing or the victim's clothing.
Can you talk now about the work that you did in this case? What is the first thing that you did on this case?
Again, all of the photos, I would have looked at the entirety of the photos, and then I would have gone to the videos, the body cam videos.
So essentially you followed that protocol or methodology that you outlined previously.
Yes, sir.
Should be fairly obvious, but what are you looking for when you get this initial information? You're looking at the photos and videos.
Again, looking to identify blood patterns that exist in the scene. So as I mentioned before, first we identify the patterns, then from there we're able to identify one of, say, 6 mechanisms, and then from those mechanisms we know that, and I keep using that arterial spurt, and sometimes you hear people talk about it. You see this inverted U on a wall or whatever. Well, if I have that, then I want to go back to the autopsy report to see or determine as to whether or not I have some type of artery that's breached. If not, it could be some type of severe injury that's running down my arm as I happen to be moving around the scene. So identify the patterns, which give you the mechanism, which then you look for what could have caused that, or what actions may have the victim or the suspect taken. Certainly, let's just say it's not uncommon to try to clean up a scene. So when you look, you may find white patterns, you may find, so when you look at the scene, here we have a victim who's supine, or excuse me, laying on the ground, that they appear to be deceased, but yet here I have some white patterns that are either on the wall or they're on the floor, so I know there's been what we refer to as post-event activity.
You said you had photos, you had body cam images in this case. What other information did you have access to?
I actually had, 1 minute, Your Honor. I actually received, I believe, most, if not all, of the information that was available, which there is some of it I did not review, but I have a list. Do you need me to go through that?
No, you don't need to go through that list. I think we can talk about it as it becomes
Okay.
relevant to the work that you did. You stated you relied on photographs in reaching some of the conclusions in your report. Did you include those photographs in the report that you prepared itself?
So what I do is the photographs that I rely upon in writing my report, I actually make those a copy of my report. So essentially, as I write my report, my photos progress from 1 through whatever the number of photos I have. Likewise, I usually divide them up into areas of what I call areas of interest. So in other words, it might be the particular room here, it may be the actual victim here, it could be the suspect. So again, as we go through the report, the photos go in line with my report.
I'm going to approach and show you would have been marked as State's Exhibits 217 through 259.
Yes, sir? Yes, sir? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to admit State's Exhibit 217 through 259 by stipulation of the parties.
Ms. Watt, any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, States Exhibits 217 through 259 are admitted.
The state would request permission to publish.
You may.
Would it assist you in discussing the work that you did to look at the photographs that you included in your report?
Yes, sir.
Any additional information that you believe is important before we look at these photographs?
No, sir.
A second.
All right, I'm showing what you have marked in your report as photograph number 1. That's State's Exhibit 217. What are we seeing here?
So this would be the left side of Mr. Cooper's face, and we're looking at the 2 entrance wounds. Of note there, not only do we have the 2 entrance wounds, but we also have, if you notice, it's clear in the left edge of the left eye. You can see the stippling, those little red areas. They almost look like little red dots on the skin. Basically, that's the burn, because again, as a bullet comes out of a firearm, not only does the bullet come out, but the primer residue, because when a bullet fires, in this case, you have the primer residue as well as the propellant. And as the bullet comes out, some of that propellant's coming out, some of it's burnt and unburnt, and some of that primer, if you do have a primer in there, but basically it gives you that indication of how close the firearm is. So what we see here is Mr. Cooper, his face has been washed down, the 2 entrance wounds as well as the stippling.
Could you use your laser pointer to point out the stippling that you were referencing?
So we have the entrance wound here, and we have the entrance on the lateral side and the medial side of the face here. And I'm sorry, you can see the stippling here going on, and we can pick it up. We can see it here as we look around here. So we have what, again, stippling. That's, whether it be in this particular case where it's red, that's some of the powder as it sears the skin when it contacts the skin.
As a forensic investigator, what does that tell you, if anything, about where the gun was in relation to Mr. Cooper's face when it was fired?
Well, normally what would happen is you get a range from the medical examiner how big that cone is, because when a firearm discharges, what will happen is that propellant or that primer residue will follow the bullet, and it comes out in a conical nature or a cone, and ultimately it begins to, remember I mentioned before, gravity and air resistance, it slows it down, and ultimately it falls to the ground. Well, normally what will happen is your medical examiner may, and not in all cases, either from the clothing or from the wound, get a pattern of how big that pattern is. And if you recover the firearm, you have to use the same ammunition, you have to use the same firearm caliber and make.
What is she
Ideally,
crying
they use
now?
the same gun if they recover it. And what they do is test firings, usually of white
What the
cotton,
heck,
at various
lady?
distances to determine the barrel to distance of the firearm. But the fact that the firearm wasn't here, the best you can do is that the firearm, or at least the end of the barrel, was fairly close. And there are some textbooks that quote distances. The male, for example, would give you a distance when you have this type, or at least stippling, but again, the barrel is within a distance where you get that stippling or gunshot residue.
You noted the entrance wounds. Were you aware of any exit wounds?
There were no exit wounds, sir.
Why is that important to you?
Again, if you're looking for any type of forward spatter, not only that, but if I have an entrance wound here and I have an exit wound, let's just look at that example. Well, I would anticipate I'm going to have bleeding from both this side flow as well as this side. If I only have an entrance without that exit, so here I have the exit, then essentially when I'm looking at the photos, I'm saying, okay, the only source of blood is right here. And granted, there will be some out of the nose and mouth because I have the fracture, skull fracture, so I have the associated nose and mouth, but I'm certainly not going to get anything here. So again, trying to associate what I have in the photos with the wounds that have been documented by the medical examiner.
Showing you what's been marked in your report as photograph number 2. It states Exhibit 218. What are we seeing here?
This is the, I believe, east side of the house, and I believe in the reports this was referred to as the front door here. If you notice, there's a 2 steps leading down. There's actually a cross, and there's the actual gate.
That's previously as states Exhibit number 305, which essentially is an overview of the crime scene. Would it assist your testimony to reference that as well?
Yes, sir.
Judge, with the court's permission, I would ask to once again publish states Exhibit 305.
You may.
Yes, sir.
Are you crying because you miss your pretty house? Is that why you're crying? 'Cause
And we've
you
heard
saw a
some
picture of your
testimony
pretty
previously
house?
that the door that we're seeing here is the door behind the recliner that Mr. Cooper was found in on the date of offense. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir.
Any further information from State's Exhibit 218?
No, sir.
State's Exhibit number 219, what are we seeing here?
In this photograph here, I'm trying to give an overall view of the scene. And again, we're looking at the door here. As I mentioned before, here's that railing, comes off the house, comes down and around, and you can see there's an actual gate right here opening. And what we have here is a piece of metal that goes across along the step itself, or just above the step. And we can see the gates open, and likewise we have this, I believe was a Michael Kors purse, or a Michael Kors clutch, I'm not sure the correct term, but that happened to be a purse that was on the concrete.
And are you able to display for the jury using your pointer where that area is on State's Exhibit 305?
Of the This is the Michael Kors? This is
I'm
right
sorry,
here.
just the stairway that you were referencing?
Again, the stairway here, and we can see when you go up one, they call it a stair tread. So as you go up the first stair to that stair tread, you can see the metal extending across the base of the railing. And we can see how this here, the actual gate swings from the here on that left side, and then we climb the next step, second step, third step to what I refer to as the landing.
And so we can orient ourselves with the crime scene.
Oh, sure.
Are you, on the state's exhibit, the demonstrative there,
So here's the door right here. So here we have the recliner, and this is the door here. And this is where you'd step out and make your way, making
Okay. I didn't realize they showed the autopsy photo. I'll be nice. I just don't like this woman.
your way down the stairs, out this way. Here we go, through the door, down the stairs, and making your way that way.
thank you. This is State's Exhibit 220, marked in your report as photograph number 4.
And so what we have here, these are referred to as placards, evidence placards. So we can see that we have number 6, 7, and 8. And what they indicate is some blood stains. This is the doorway, that front door as I refer to it. East side of the house. We have some blood stains here, some blood stains here. Likewise on the concrete stair tread, as well as that cross member. I'll use the term cross member. Here's the railing. Here are the hinges, so the gate is swinging back from, as I come down the stairs, it's going from left to right, opening.
May we approach quick?
You may. Still all able to see the screen up there? Okay? Okay, I'm getting head nods, so.
And Mr. Martin, are you still able to see State's Exhibit 305?
You know, I may have to stand at some point if you don't mind. And I can stand in the box, but,
If you need to stand up to see it, that's fine.
okay, thank you.
All right, this is marked in your report as number 5, State's Exhibit 221.
So I actually have there, it's 2 photos in the series. One is the photo as I received it, and then the following photo, I used Photoshop to actually indicate areas of blood stains, in this particular case on that stair tread, the first one, if I may, coming out the door right here. That's that landing. This would be the siding, the east side of the house, as one would go into the house.
State's Exhibit 222, marked as number 6 in your report, you indicated you'd used Photoshop on the previous photo to indicate some blood stains. Is that what we're
Yes,
seeing
sir.
here?
Yes, sir.
What type of stains are these?
They appear to be drip stains. Again, remember, as I talked about before, we can see the irregular shape of the stains. This happens to be concrete. Certainly, there's some small stains here. We can see the small stains. We do have an indication of how big, but again, they appear to be some type of a drip stain on the surface.
Marked in your report is number 7, State's Exhibit 223.
Yes, sir.
What are we seeing here?
Again, this is the first in the set of two. The second one, I've marked it up, but we can see the placard, evidence placard number here of size, and we can see the various stains here.
We're showing you now what's been marked as number 8, States Exhibit 224. What types of stains are these?
And again, remember I talked about the irregular surface here. Actually, they're very close together. They almost appear to be, size-wise, very small, but they appear to be drip. Well, they could almost be even a transfer, but more likely drip, because they all appear to be, irregular circular stains. But again, certainly close together. This one, a regular shaped stain. So I don't know if that's some type of contact or again, the impact at a slight angle. But again, due to the surface texture, it's tough to delineate exactly what they are.
And again, just so we're clear, where the image was taken, is it your understanding that stairway that you referenced?
Yes, so we had the landing, which is 6. This is on that first step, is one step down from the landing. If I were leaving the house, that step down. And again, this would be the following step, as one would be come out the door. We're at the landing for 6. Now we're moving down the first tread, and now we're down to that second area. That's that cross member, the term I'll use, cross member of that railing, where we can see some stains, and again, that surface texture. You can see regular stains. Again, I use the term foot impression. What we hear is what appears to be the outsole or the bottom of a shoe that's contaminated with blood. As it contacts this surface here, it leaves the impression. We don't have the shoe. One of two things. We could have a positive impression. Okay, a positive impression.
StreamYard finally got tired of this guy, too.
If I have blood on the tread and I press it down, that's a positive impression. What you can't, let's just jump to my finger. If I were to take some blood and put it on my finger, and I were to carefully wipe it across here, the blood on the top of my ridges, because we've all looked at our fingers and we see these
Okay, I guess I'm going to have to turn the camera off and leave it off.
where someone will touch something, they leave a positive impression because they touch it sufficiently to leave blood on the surface of their ridges on, in this case here, the speaker. Well, as I move along, the blood is off the top of my ridges, but if I press down enough, what ends up happening is blood, we call those the furrows, right? So in other words, if you look at your tires, those recessed areas, those are called furrows, or on your shoe, those recessed areas. If I press down, that could literally give me what's called a negative impression. But what we do have is, whether it's a negative or positive impression, we do have what appears to be a footwear on that cross member, excuse me.
And for the record, that was State's Exhibit 225,
Hey, Carla.
marked in Mr. Martin's report as number 9. Showing you State's Exhibit 226, marked in your report as number 10. What are we seeing here?
Again, I've gone through and this appears to be spatter. I've used arrows to indicate what looks like spatter. And again, spatter being something, some type of force has been applied to blood. And it could be any number of things, create these little spatter stains. Notice how they're circular in nature, and granted it's hitting the surface. Again, these appear to be some type of drip stains, but I have some very small, and again, blood wants to hold on to something. And just a quick example, if I were to wash my hands, for the most part, the water's going to come off. If I do this type of thing, that's going to create those small little stains. So when I start to get these small little stains like that, and again, what we're assuming here is all the red-brown stains in this particular case here are blood, that this type of small stain here, there was something that created that. And it could be something as simple as the shoe. Envision the shoe slapping down. It could have created or some of that blood to come off and create that spatter. So again, size, as I mentioned before, is important as well as the shape of the stain.
And just to be clear, you said the shoe itself could have caused that spatter where it
Oh,
contaminated
it could have
with.
been on the top of the shoe. I call that the upper, just in case I use the term. The upper would be anything other than the outsole. Just another photograph here from a different view, where they placed the placard, the evidence placard number 8.
And that's State's Exhibit 227, noted in your report as number 11. And again, what are we seeing here in State's Exhibit 228, your number 12?
Yes, we did in the previous photograph. It's just a different angle. As I mentioned before, I took the 2 different angles because I'm not sure that in the previous photo we were able to capture that or was able to illustrate that for the jury.
Judge, I think this may be a good time for our morning break.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it has been going about an hour and a half, so we will take our mid-morning break now and ask to be ready to go in approximately 15 minutes. And again, I'd remind you of the admonition I gave you many times already, so see you in a bit.
Oh, man. There are times when expert witnesses are interesting. This is not one of those times. And I don't think it's his fault. Like, I think if it was in a classroom setting and you were learning about this and you wanted to learn about this, I think you would be very interested. And he explains things very well. I think if you were a student that wanted to learn about blood spatter analysis, you would be hanging on his every word and you would understand it. He's very easy to understand. But this is a trial. I want to get to the meat and the potatoes. I don't want to know every little thing about blood spatter analysis and then get to the relevant stuff. He was like just an hour alone on the mechanics of blood spatter before they even got anything relevant. So, I have a question for you guys while we're on break. Totally not related whatsoever to court or trials. I am going to Mickey's not so very scary Halloween party in August. It's only Halloween in August because the tickets are cheaper. It is I forgot. 120, 127, 117, something like that. It's over $100 anyway. I forgot how much it is in October, but super expensive. Anyway, because it's from 7 to midnight. And the big draw about it is that because it's a special event, there's less people, so the lines aren't as long. Not everything is operating. Um but you can get in at 4. They give you like a little wristband. There's a special parade, there's special shows, there's special fireworks. And at the beginning of every line to the rides, midnight is past my bedtime. You're absolutely right, Wiggles. My bedtime is 10, so it is past my bedtime. Um, but I'm gonna brave it. I'm gonna brave for free candy. It's not really free candy though, because you're paying to you're paying to go to the event. But they give you a trick or treat bag, and you get candy, and every line for every ride they give you candy. So, and it's good candy too. Um, but my question is, you can dress up. It's the only time you're allowed to dress up, because that's one of the rules of Disney World. Little kids are allowed to dress up, but you're not allowed to go in full costume, because I guess so you won't be mistaken for the people that work at Disney that are in full costume, so you're not allowed to. This is the only time that you're allowed to wear a costume. And I was going to go as Belle. I was going to buy a Belle costume. The costume is $40. And I was going to spend money on a costume. I'd rather have the money for spending money at the park. And I'm sure I won't be the only person that's not dressed up if I don't. What would you guys do? Would you guys spend money on a costume, or would you save the money for spending money? What would you guys do? And I have to rent a scooter. And the scooters are $65. Well, they're $85, but you get 20 back. So there's that too. Because I can't walk all over that park without, I will be in severe pain. And it's a Sunday. We're going on a Sunday. So I have to get up and stream early. Spending money. Yeah. Yeah, I went to the Alice in Wonderland costumes. See, the price range. The price range of the costumes are crazy. Some of them are hundreds. Some of them are 30, $40. Those are the cheap costumes. But the Belle costume, I wanted to do the yellow dress with the crinoline and the long yellow gloves, and that was like 100 and something bucks. I was like, no. But the Belle, the one where she's walking through the village reading the book, that one was like $40, and that's my favorite Belle anyway. So I thought about getting that one. I did the Alice in Wonderland one was more expensive. I forgot how much it was. I looked at that one because I love Alice in Wonderland too. But I don't know. I'm also I don't know about the scooter either, because I don't want to spend the money on the scooter, but I know if I don't, I'm gonna be miserable. Partway through the night, I'm just gonna be like, I'm so tired and I'm in pain, and because I'm going with my cousin and her son, and She just had back surgery and she's having shoulder surgery on the 22nd. So she will possibly be in a shoulder sling. So she's got her own scooter that her doctor prescribed that she's renting right now because of the surgery. So she's going to be in her scooter and in a sling. I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? And she's like, yes, I want to do that. I'm like, okay, all right. I'm kind of scared she's gonna back out on me because she always does. Like, how many times have I told you guys we're gonna go do this and we're gonna go do that, and I'm gonna make a video. I'm gonna make a members only video for you guys, and then it never happens because she backs out on me. But this time, I'm gonna. She says she's buying because we're both on disability, so we get paid the same day of the month. She says she's buying our tickets. I'm buying my tickets when we get paid. We get paid the third Wednesday of the month, so we're both buying our tickets supposedly. If she backs out and I buy my tickets, I'm going by myself this time. So it's not, I'm not backing out this time. She might back out, but I'm not backing out. So I want to get a good video of the parade for you guys because it opens up with the Headless Horseman. So the Headless Horseman comes, it's so amazing. We've been one other time and I have seen part of the parade, but I've not actually seen the Headless Horseman in person. I've only seen videos of it. And it's pretty amazing on video to watch the Headless Horseman ride down Main Street. So I can't wait to see it. And I'm thinking in the scooter, if we're in our scooters and we get there early enough, that we'll be on the sidewalk in front of the people standing behind us. We'll get a really good view. That will be the advantage of being in a scooter. But we have to get there before, plenty of time to get there in front of people. So I like Disney's Halloween event better because it's not scary. I'm a chicken. This shirt, my Michael Myers shirt that I adore. I like scary movies. This is my Michael Myers shirt because I adore the movie Halloween. I like slasher flicks. I like scary books. I like Stephen King. We got this. Is this the right shoulder? No, this is the right shoulder. Oh, you can't see it. We got this at Halloween Horror Nights 2022. I didn't realize till this morning when I put this on and I looked at the date. It has been 3 years since I've been to Universal. I think we got this one of the very last times that we went. We did not go to Halloween Horror Nights. We got this during the day. We were there while Halloween Horror Nights were going on, but it's like the Disney event. You have to be out of the park at a certain time because the event starts at night. But because of my love of the Halloween movies, I had to have the shirt. So I got the shirt. I did not go to Halloween Horror Nights because I did that once when I was young, very young. And I said I would never, ever, 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 ever do that again because that was terrifying. I don't like haunted houses at all. Not at all. It terrifies me. I'm claustrophobic. So it ramps up the fear with me to the point that I can't take it. I can't take it. I can't. So but I saw this shirt, but I love very family friendly Halloween. It's a lot of fun. So I don't know. My cousin doesn't have a costume. Last time we went, I dressed up as Snow White. And I thought, well, I'll just dress up as Snow White again. But my costume is too big on me now because I lost all that weight. So, I mean, I can wear it. It just, the bodice hangs hangs down kind of low. It used to be like up here because my belly, like, I guess took up the materials so that it came up higher, but now it's kind of low cut and it, like, it's just, it's too low. So, but I guess I could wear it if I don't want to spend the money for the belt costume. Yeah, I could wear it. I suppose I could wear it. It would work. I could wear just a t-shirt or something underneath it so that if I do bend over, you don't, like, you don't see anything. Yeah, cuz that's the only problem with it. It's just the bodice is not. So something is up with Alan Jackson and Hank Brennan and the Norfolk's DA office. We suspect. But we're not really sure. I didn't get a chance yet to watch the interview of Turtle Boy that Turtle Boy did with Alan Jackson. Judy has been telling me that there's like some cryptic answers that were like kind of like he was kind of hiding some, not hiding, but like, things he couldn't speak about. So, and there's a rumor that he's going to be part of the civil suit. And there was that video of him at 34 Fairview that the new owners let him go in and look around. What was that about? Like, is he trying to get the case reopened or is he using that for the civil suit? Like, what is going on for that? Because that, and like, there's a giant stain in the garage, y'all. Like, giant stain that looks like blood. It's a red stain, giant red stain. It wasn't ever tested. Nobody knows. So apparently Jackson is going to file an ethics violation against Hank Brennan and the DA's office for an intentional Brady violation over Detective Barros's, or Trooper Barros. Is he a trooper? Barros? Was he a state? No. He was just a detective sergeant. What was he? He was just a cop with a regular cop. Barros, the one that said that the taillight was cracked. Evasive. Thank you. That's what I meant. I couldn't find the word. Turtle Boy announced before the interview AJ would not be able to talk about some things right now. Yeah. Come on, StreamYard. You were doing so good. What happened? Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it's a case that keeps on giving. It's like the Sarah Boone case. Remember how long that just kept giving more and more and more good stuff? Well, now the Karen Reed case is doing that too. Man. That, if this whole thing could be like a fictional story, like nobody would believe this is real. Like, it's insane how crazy this thing is. It is literally unbelievable. Not figuratively, literally unbelievable. Oh, good. They don't need none. This needs to be. There's no statute of limitations on murder. I know a lot of the lawyers are saying it's going to be hard to convict anybody else because she was already on trial for it. Yeah, she was acquitted, which means she didn't do it. So if she didn't do it, somebody else did. So why would it be hard? And a new jury isn't going to know that, right? Aren't they going to have to pick a jury that doesn't know anything about the case? So a new jury's not going to know that. So then why would that even matter? I don't understand. But that's what I've heard Peter say. I know, and I don't, probably some of the other lawyers, I don't know, but I know I've heard Peter say it. Like, it'll be hard to convict someone because someone's already been brought to trial for this. But she's been acquitted, which means she didn't do it, so somebody else did. So I don't know. And I know there was also, like, I don't understand some of the weirdos on, maybe I shouldn't say weirdos on here. I don't want to start getting harassed by myself. Not like, I mean, I've got 9 people watching me right now. It's not like a bunch of people watch my channel, but on X, there was some video of some car driving by Brian Higgins' house and him out there yelling at the car. I'm like, why are you chasing cars that are driving by your house? What is your problem, Higgins? Seriously.
All right, go ahead and have a seat, everybody.
That people are stalking you or something? It is going to be very hard to find people that haven't heard about this case. Absolutely.
Okay, we are back on the record after our mid-morning break. We have the jury, counsel, and parties present. We have Mr. Martin on the stand. And, sir, I would just remind you that even though we took a break, you're still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
And with that, Mr. Ringel, you may resume your direct examination.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge.
I didn't understand what was going on. I was just like, I saw it and I was like, what the heck is that? What's going on now?
Could we lower the lights just a little bit? Thank you. Showing you what's been marked in your report, Mr. Martin, as number 13, it's State's Exhibit 229. What are we seeing there?
This is the stairway that comes down from the upper level. I believe it was referred to the sewing room of the home. I don't know if the jury can see it, but may I stand, Your Honor? May I?
You may.
Thank you. If we look here, or on the monitor here, if you look here, I've placed a green arrow in the photograph at the base of the stairs on the right hand of that riser. And in the next photograph, what we'll see is the blood stain at the base of the stairs. This is, again, to orient you as to where that stain was located.
State's Exhibit 230, your number 14, is that the blood stain you were just referencing?
Yes, sir. So, again, the evidence placard was placed by the investigators here, and what we can see is, again, we have the scale here, placard number 1, stain. Notice we have a circular stain there. So what we have, circular stain, it appears to be a drip stain at the base of the stairs. The thing that we look at, okay, so I have a drip stain here. Well, if I have a drip stain, Is it isolated? This appears to be isolated because, at least from the investigative reports, and I can only work with the information that I have. So essentially, could there be some latent stains there? In other words, and let me just say that, excuse me 1 minute. Let me just say this. There are two types of blood stains. There are patent stains, P-A-T-E-N-T. Those are readily visible. There could also be latent stains there. In other words, I could have had a little bit of blood, and let's just use the example of my footwear. It comes up to a point where you don't see the blood anymore on the surface, and let's say the floor. But as I walk along, there's still trace amounts. So that's what we call a latent, because if I take a particular chemical and I treat it, it will actually make that blood stain, which is otherwise invisible, visible. So what we could have here is we obviously have a latent, appears to be a drip stain. Could there have been additional stains? I didn't see any, nor were there any recorded in the report, leading to, and I use the term the living room, or where Mr. Cooper was found, nor did investigators detect anything else. So this just happens to be a, if you want to call it a random stain with no association. Because if I did have, and let's just say I have this drip stain here, drip stain here, drip stain here, many times what we do is we follow, obviously, the drip stains. That's called a drip trail. It tells us where many times it's coming from and where it's going to. But again, this happens to be an isolated stain. It wasn't tested for blood, but at least in my opinion, it appears to be blood. And certainly it appears to be Mr. Cooper's. Could have been from a separate incident. I've certainly had cases where there are blood stains pre-existing in the house that came not only from residents there, but from a previous resident of that apartment. So again, here we have this isolated blood stain, which really doesn't have any connection through a drip trail or any other format.
And Judge, with the court's permission, it looks like 305 has been taken down. I'm going to republish that, if that's okay.
Okay.
I may have to stand. Sorry.
All right. Moving on to State's Exhibit number 231, marked in your report as number 15. What are we seeing here?
So this is a photograph which was taken off the body cam. It's a still frame. And essentially, as the first officer is coming into the room here, his body camera is working. And again, I have the ability to take a frame off of that. And what we have here is we have Karina Cooper here. You can see her as she's straddling. In fact, this happens to be her left leg here. And we can, yes, stand, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. We can see that she's on the Mr. Cooper here. And again, one of the things that we look at, even though it's a photograph that appears to be out of focus, or again, it's a body camera, it's moving. So again, what happens is we have some motion in the camera itself. Right away, we start to look for, do I see any blood flow running down his legs, any blood flow here? What do I see? That I can see the recliner. The recliner appears to be in the back position, in that reclined. I don't know how far back it reclines, but certainly we can see that the footrest is in the up position. We can also see here the quilt, because again, what are the positions of the items in the room, the evidence in the room? So we can see that there's a quilt behind Mr. Cooper as well.
And you stated that was a still from a body cam. It's noted there as body cam Fangman, I believe.
Yes, sir. Yes, I have it marked as Fangman. Yes, sir.
And for the record, Deputy,
Sir, do you want to pull your microphone down
Sorry,
again?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Yes, I have it marked as, it's a photo 15 body cam Fangman.
just for the record, Deputy Fangman's body cam was previously admitted as State's Exhibit number 102. What are you seeing of relevance to your analysis? I know you already noted that you're looking at the position of the items in the room. You're also looking for flow patterns or the lack of flow patterns on the extremities of Mr. Cooper. Anything of note with regard to the fact that Karina Cooper is on top of the decedent?
So one of the things that we have to consider, and it always comes up, has the scene been altered? It can be intentional or it can be unintentional. So we know that Mr. Cooper, certainly 911 has been called, that he's incurred an injury. We can see that Karina Cooper is on top of him. So right away when we're doing an assessment, or at least I'm looking at the photographs, because ultimately she's removed from Mr. Cooper, we have to take into consideration that there's possible movement of Mr. Cooper by Karina Cooper. Not only that, but what has she touched that could have altered? For example, I could have Mr. Cooper could have some blood on his face, could be moving that blood around, which could be changing the appearance of the stain. So in my analysis, if I had a flow pattern, so flow, as we talked about before, gravity's causing it to run down, well, I could see this movement now from the body camera, and that's why it's so important that you have to look at all of the evidence, whether it be video or photographic, to be able to account for what patterns we see at the scene.
And so would you characterize Ms. Cooper's actions sitting on top of the decedent here as altering the scene?
Yes, sir.
State's Exhibit number 232, again marked as body cam Fangman, marked in your report as number 16. What do we see here?
Again, Your Honor, may I stand, please?
You may.
Thank you. So what we do, again, we have Karina Cooper here on Mr. Cooper's lap. We can see her left arm is up by his face. And now we look at the entirety of the scene. Again, top of the recliner, we can see that there's I use the term quilt there. So in the subsequent photo later, I want to see if the position of the quilt is as it's depicted. Certainly movement or movement and removing it from the could cause movement of the quilt. Also, I have a better view of the room. The entire room. Here we can see this is the doorway to the outside. This is that front door I previously talked about, the east side of the dwelling. You can see that the door is closed. So again, was the door open and closed at the time first officers responded? At least here, the door is full. Likewise, as we look in the area of this arm, looking at the photos, because I looked at the photos prior to looking at the video, I looked at the photos to determine was there any blood staining on the arm of the chair? What is the extent of blood staining to Karina Cooper, if any? So again, even though this happens to be out of focus, again, it's due to the movement. If he were standing still, would have a clearer picture. But again, I can see the quilt here. I can see her position. I know that obviously she's placed her at least left hand on the right side of his face.
Sorry, StreamYard's messing with my audio again.
Sure, I understand. It would just, I think, make it more convenient for him, and when he stands up, the microphone doesn't catch, and anyway, so he would have a view of the screen too.
Your Honor, could we put it here where she stepped down? This might be a, no.
I'll let Mr. Ringo, Kodiaga, you're out of your work. Allow Ms. Watt to get back to her original location.
Can you still see State's Exhibit 305?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ringo, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. You stated that
Come on, StreamYard, stop.
Deputy Fangman's body camera, you said you're using software that allows you to look at approximately 30 frames per second, if I remember correctly.
Yes, sir.
Were you able to determine in looking at that footage what Ms. Cooper is doing while she's on top of Ryan Cooper?
Well, and you'd have to look at the video, but you can see that she's placing her hand across Mr. Cooper and hugging him, as well as in the actual video, you can hear her crying and commenting as well.
Were you able to determine if her face was making contact with?
Oh, in the video, yeah, her face was making contact with Mr. Cooper's face, almost a rubbing motion to the face.
Were you able to tell that was the right side of Mr. Cooper's face where she was making contact?
Well, at least in the portion of the video, it appeared to be the right side of the face, in one portion of the video that I specifically recall. Yes, sir.
And here it looks as though she's making contact with the left side of his, is that correct?
No, that would be the right side, sir. Right. His head is to her. His head is to her. To her left. No, to her right. So his head is. It looks like her head is. This is his head back here on that side of her.
All right. So he's facing forward in the chair.
Right. So that would be the right side of his face. Her face is up against this left side here.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't touch anything.
All right. Moving on to what's been marked as State's Exhibit 233, marked in your report as 17. What are we seeing here?
This is a photo which I was provided by Trent Villaret from DCI. This was in his report. I believe it came from one of the body cameras. I'm not sure, but prior to first responders arriving on the scene, and what we see here is Karina Cooper has been removed. And again, what we're looking at here is this is probably one of the earliest photos that we see. And again, we have Mr. Cooper here in the chair. Remember, I talked about flow patterns, trying to determine as to whether he may have been standing at the time, kneeling at the time. Well, first of all, as we look, we see a saturation stain, and I did mention that briefly. Saturation stain is when I have blood that's on something that's porous, such as fabric or clothing. So we can see it's making its way down because of gravity, so it's making its way down, but I don't have any flow pattern going across his stomach. Again, these blankets could have been placed after, post-event, or they could have been there prior to, which again, I don't see any blood on them. Likewise, the other thing that we want to take a look at is his left arm, and one of what we're looking for there is, do we see any evidence, the flow pattern in the shirt? Notice, it comes down his sleeve, but there's still a couple of inches. Likewise, we have some blood out here, and I'll talk about that in later slides, but one of the reasons for this blood out here could have been his arm extended out here. So instead of his arm being flexed at the elbow, right here as we see it, into his waist, if the position were out here, blood could have flowed down, because we know the wound is on that left side, could have flowed down his hand, and his fingers could have been here, which account for this, and we'll talk about that later. But from everything that we see, or I see in this position, likewise, again, what's around him, we can see that quilt. Here's the quilt behind him. We can see on the quilt that shiny area here on the, right side of his face is blood, clotted blood. We can also see over here there's some blood that's amassed here. So again, what we have is the quilt, he's up against it. There's no evidence at all of him in a position other than that reclining position. And again, generally, here's another photo to show that the door was closed at the time. We can see this large pattern here, because again, ultimately when first responders or investigators come to the scene, certainly the dynamics could have changed. You could have some flow going on that could have increased that pattern. So this gives me an idea, at least when this photo was taken, this was what the scene looked like. And again, we had Karina Cooper here. We do know that she was involved in some of the altering of the scene, whether, like I say, we don't know intentional or unintentional, but certainly that gives us an indication that, we have to consider that when we look at the case in summary.
To be clear then, from what you're observing here, this was taken pretty much immediately after Karina Cooper was removed.
Yes, sir.
And there was not a flow pattern down Ryan Cooper's left arm, correct?
Left arm, no, sir. Nor down nor his stomach.
The door is closed, and also there's a vent, I guess we'll say about the middle right of that image. Is that vent covered with a vent cover?
A floor vent, yes, sir. Hot air system, so we have a floor vent in the floor itself. In fact, one other of note, which is important in this case, this floor is actually particle board. At least that's the term I know it is. So unlike if this were a hardwood floor, granted you have a space between the floors, but the floor has been finished, so it's pretty much non-porous. Or if this were inlaid or some type of non-porous surface, the fact that we have this particle board that is somewhat porous, we have to take that into consideration when we're evaluating all of the evidence at the end of this.
There's some blood pools in this image. Sounds like from your testimony, if I understand correctly, there's some later images that are better to describe what's going on with those particular blood pools.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
State's Exhibit 234 marked in your report as 18.
Yes, sir. This is a photograph. Obviously, it was taken sometime later. The sun has come up. Mr. Cooper has been removed from the recliner. They've placed a sheet on the floor, and they've simply moved him from here to here. Again, the purpose of the photograph here is to give an overall view of the room, so we can see here's the door, and again, the door was still shut. But again, we have the recliner here, and ultimately Mr. Cooper here, but we look at the arm, we don't see any blood because we didn't see the inside of the arm. So in this photograph here, we didn't see any on the outside, nor do we see any on the inside. Likewise, across the abdominal area, we don't see any blood. And even the left arm, nothing there and nothing in that thigh area of either leg or even the feet. So with each photograph, we're looking to say, okay, in the last photograph, there was no evidence of him being up at the time. Another photograph that supports the fact that he was in the recliner and it was reclined at the time of the discharge of the two shots.
Your number 19, State's Exhibit 235.
In this photograph here, what we're looking at is Mr. Cooper is back this way. This is the carpet that we noticed, or we noted Mr. Cooper on. This is heading out towards that, and this is the doorway that goes into that sewing room. So on the diagram, here's Mr. Cooper here. This is that area of the carpet, and this is that doorway that goes into that sewing room where that drop of blood was located. So here we are up in this area. That's heading through that doorway. I've got two different symbols here. I put the green ellipse. These are blood stains. They appear to be, notice the ellipses? Excuse me. Notice there's a tail going this way, so it's telling me that the blood actually hits, and it's actually going in this direction when I someone's going or something's going this way that's bloody. Not only that, but here we have two footprints, not footwear, but two footprints. We can see the right foot here, and we can see the left foot here. Of note, when I reviewed the reports, there were additional bloody footprints which were on this carpet here. So what that tells me is after the time, after the event, the shooting, someone with bare feet stepped in the blood, went across the carpet, because again, relying on the reports, went across the carpet, and ultimately here to here. I didn't have any additional photos going into here, but as I mentioned before, the amount of blood diminishes. There could be additional going this way, but we at least have two footprints, one being right here, and, excuse me, this is a right here, and this happens to be I'm sorry, right here, what did I say, right, left? This appears to be a right as well, going towards the sewing room.
States Exhibit 236, your number 20.
Sure. This is a photograph of Mr. Cooper's right foot and his lower leg. What we see there on him, this appears to be a transfer stain, and that something bloody came in contact with Mr. Cooper's foot. We see a transfer stain here on the bottom, but again, we don't see any drips up top, nor do we see any flow. But in reviewing the reports, there was a statement by Karina Cooper as to grabbing Mr. Cooper's foot as she climbed on top of him. So certainly the possible origin of this is with a bloody hand as you are climbing on top of, or as she was, excuse me, climbing on top of Mr. Cooper. That could have been the transfer stain as she's climbing up.
States Exhibit 237, you are 21.
Again, this happens to be Mr. Cooper's left foot as he's on the floor. And again, the purpose is to note that there is no blood on the bottoms of his feet, no blood drips on the top of his feet, and again, nothing flowing down his leg. Because with each photo that we look at, if we're saying that there's no evidence of him being up, we need to keep looking over, and what we're doing is we're trying to falsify, or we're trying to prove that there is no other evidence other than him being in that reclined position as we see him.
This is States Exhibit 238, your 22.
So here we have Mr. Cooper. We can see that this is the white sheet that he was placed on, and obviously they place a clean sheet down prior to putting Mr. Cooper on there, and we can see blood stains here. The term that we use is that he's still purging. So in other words, he has blood. Obviously there's a breach in his circulatory system. There's blood, which is amassed. Remember I talked about before, he has damage here. So we note that he's still bleeding as he's here, and granted, these are the only two wounds. You're going to get some from the nose and mouth due to the fracture of the cranium of the skull. You're going to get bleeding in there. What's causing that? So we see this, but I've placed two arrows, and what we see in this one here, this is the left shoulder, we see some clots here. So again, clotting tells us that there's been some time that has elapsed for this clot to have amassed. Likewise, I've put a green arrow towards the right here. We can see a clot here, and there's some along his right shoulder, but we can see additional clots here on the front of his shirt. Likewise, his nose, we can see some dried blood. It's actually began to crack. So we have this mass of blood. It's not uncommon for blood to begin to crack here. We can see it coming out of his nostril. What we do have, and again, that's why and I failed to point it out in one of the previous photos of him on the chair, is if you notice we have a flow pattern. Remember I talked about that before. So blood came out of his nose and it flows down here off to the side of his head. Well, in the previous photograph, there was no flow pattern that existed here. Notice the flow pattern is going down here, so this accounts for him sitting in the chair, but this was not in the previous photo, and we know that he's purging, to use that term. So that's when he's being taken off of the recliner and his head moves off to the side, and that's what causes that flow. So again, that's post-event, or you might hear me use the term artifact. That was created after he was taken out of the chair.
States 239, you're 23.
So again, we have Mr. Cooper here looking straight down. We can see I've put the green arrow, clots here, giving us some indication of time. Likewise, we can see the green arrow here, or you can see it here, the green arrow, in the same position, whatever's easier if you can't see it back there. But again, we've got a clot going along the shoulder area. So what that's telling us is, now think about it, if he's in position in that chair and we have some bleeding going on, then obviously the blood is going to amass, and the pressure, his pressure of him up against the chair creates, for lack of a better term, a dam, and ultimately that blood pulls up there and may even run across the back of his neck and pool up here, and that's what creates that clot that we see here. Likewise, this is that flow pattern I talked about before, that's post-event or artifact. Notice the blood flow down now. Envision him sitting in the recliner. As he loses it due to the fractures here and it's bleeding, it's going to flow down his face. And then the other thing that we noted is in the video, and I testified, here we had Karina Cooper, and we could see in the video that her face comes in contact with him. And at one point, I don't recall, but I think hand does as well, but that could account for some of that. Remember I talked about that swipe pattern? So in other words, or even white pattern, because now she's moving from this side with the blood to that side, so it could be a swipe or it could be a wipe. Sometimes you hear the term smear when you really can't tell what it is, but certainly there's some motion going on there, and that's what could account for that, or what would account for that.
States Exhibit 240, this is your number 24.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've placed 3 green arrows on the recliner. The recliner's been placed down, Mr. Cooper's been removed. So let's just start here. He's seated. Can we turn it? There we go. Oh, much better. Well, thank you. So he's seated in the recliner here. One of the first things we want to take a look at, and I failed to use this term, there's a term called void. So essentially, if I have something here, let's just say I place my cup of water here, and I create some spatter around it, well, you would agree with me that if I pick it up, there's an absence of blood there, right? So the fact that I have an absence of blood tells me that something was there to prevent any type of blood from getting there. Well, if you notice, if the person were standing, and we don't see any evidence of Mr. Cooper standing, but if he's bleeding, and I can tell you that he'll immediately begin to bleed, well, we don't see any evidence of blood on the chair or even the back until you get up in this area where his shoulders were, and we can see the corresponding clot to the left shoulder, and we can see the corresponding clot to the right shoulder. Notice here on this yellow square, we have some saturation. So some of that serum and some of the blood does soak into the material, and it's worked its way down here. Granted, the wound is on his left side, so some of that blood does saturate down into the material, and it works its way down here. And notice, remember, wound is on that left side. His head is somewhat tilted this way. Notice the saturation stain continues down into this area here and makes its way all the way here. Likewise, saturation stain along this, I'll call it faux leather or whatever, suede, I guess might be the term. You can see that there's some blood here as well. Actually, there's some clotting there, which makes sense. So essentially, we have this void, an absence of blood, which puts, again, let's take a look at everything, this holistic approach. We have Mr. Cooper up against the recliner back as he's bleeding. The blood essentially is collecting here on his shoulder. It's migrating this way, for the most part flowing down this way, saturating down along the quilt. And ultimately, where he's got his head off to the left, we've got him bleeding into this area where the cushion, arm cushion, comes in contact with this back here. So the fact that we don't have any blood in this area is just another means by which we can confirm or say, hey, he's sitting in the chair at the time of these two shots.
States 241, you're 25.
This is, again, I put my green arrow in here. This is the clot on the, excuse me, that would be his right side. If you remember back to the photograph with him on the floor with his T-shirt, he had that large clot on his right shoulder. Now this clot on his right shoulder matches up with this clot here on the comforter or quilt on the back of his chair or his recliner. So as he's in this position, that blood is welling up between his shirt, and that's what's causing that pulled away from there. That leaves that remaining clot on the quilt. Likewise, he's got the corresponding clot on his shoulder. And here we have the this would be looking at the chair. This would be looking at it, the right side. We can see the clot here. In fact, we can see some of the clot falling down. This is most likely when Mr. Cooper, remember the predominance of the blood is flowing this way, it still hadn't totally clotted and dried. So when he's pulled from the chair, this clot begins to flow down the quilt. And if we look here in this area here, we can see how the blood, we have a saturation stain here, but we also have some dripping here. Here's that side arm of the chair. You know, notice this dull area right here, dull area right here. Well, that happens to be dried blood on the arm of the chair as well. So that's dried blood. But what's important here, we have more clotting going down here. So it tells us there's a volume of blood which is either dripping down or seeping down in this area here of the chair.
For the record, that was State Exhibit 242. Your 27 States Exhibit 243.
Yes, so this happens to be again, looking at the chair from the front, this happens to be the right side of the recliner. So again, looking at it the right side, if you were sitting in it, it would be the left side. Mr. Cooper, again, is sitting in the recliner this way. Up here, what we have, as I mentioned before, is that blood staining here. So we have some transfer stains, something wet with blood, I've encircled here. We have a little bit of a saturation stain. Not only that, but you can just about see the flow pattern going down the side of the chair. So we have some flow pattern going down the side of the chair. We can see some blood in here. In other words, blood is running down, just so happens to get inside or in between this upper portion and this side arm of the chair. It's actually running down the side. Not only is it running down the side and amassing here, but it's also running down the interior of the chair. And notice the pool that's amassing back here. This pool is because he's been sitting here for some time, and I can't tell you how long, because if you think about it, there's two factors that directly affect the size of the pool. It's the rate of flow, right? If I turn on my faucet and I just have it dripping along, that's certainly going to take quite a while for that to amass that amount of blood. Likewise, if I open my faucet up, I'm certainly going to have a lot less time. So again, and not only that, but after someone has been shot and they're succumbing to their death, blood pressure is going down, so the rate of flow is not as great as it is as time goes by. So again, to give you a time as to how long that would amass, there's a lot of things that go into that. But what we do know is that he was in this position with a sufficient amount of blood, not only to run down the side of the recliner, but to run in the recliner to create this. And this is separate than this area here. So here we have a pool amassing from blood running down here.
Based on what you're seeing here, is there anything to support the notion that the recliner was moved after the shooting?
No, because we have this flow pattern here, so it's going down, and that's why this is flowing from underneath the recliner. But we also, and I haven't talked about this is that drip pattern that I talked about. See all the little satellites that we see here that radiate around that pool? Given this photograph, not only that, but when these satellites hit, here's the other thing, is they come straight out. So here we have that parent pool here, as they come straight out, they're going to skid along here. If you notice, there's no blood really in this section here, because as they hit the corner of this chair, and at the base of this chair, not only do we have the flow pattern here, and I'm getting ahead of myself, we have all those little satellites. As that blood hits that parent stain, that satellite comes up and it's hitting the base of that chair at that low level.
Again, if this is better illustrated in a later photograph, just let me know.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to get too far ahead, but are you saying that the blood pool that we're seeing immediately next to the recliner is separate and distinct from the parent and satellite stains that are towards the bottom of the photograph?
Yes, sir.
And that's something that will be discussed later?
Coming forward, yes, sir.
States Exhibit 244, your 28.
Yes, sir. So what we have here is, again, another photograph taken of the chair. Here we have the recliner. And again, the photo allows us to see that there's no blood here. We again see the void here. But now looking in this area, we talked about that saturation as blood's running through the chair. But also now we have that drip pattern. Notice all of the satellite. And we saw in that video that I had, when that single drop dropped into that parent stain, granted there were several stains, but again, the size of this tells me that that pool had some time to amass. Not only that, but there's something over the pool that's dripping down, and with each drip, you're creating these satellite spatter. Notice how they're radiating out. They actually hit this here. They hit the base of this bureau. If anything was moved, if we look at this leg on this bureau, notice if we look at the frequency or the number of blood stains, notice how it's fairly red and it's sprinkled, or whatever term you want to use, the concentration here, and it goes back this way, but notice there's almost a lack of staining. In fact, right at the base of that foot, it almost appears that there's a lack of stains. So what that says, if anything was moved, that at some point after this, that this was moved just slightly, and what we see here are some marks in the floor. Something's moved across this. Remember I talked about swipes and wipes, but here we have some type of movement, lateral movement across here, and it's going this way, so it probably bumped this and just slightly moved this, maybe a half an inch at some particular point in time. I have a green arrow here in the foreground, or the lower portion of the photo. Again, we see that bare footprint impression. So we have a bottom of a bare foot, which is contaminated with blood, which is heading from the chair. And if you recall, I noted that, or I mentioned in the reports, there were footprint impressions on the rug, and then we saw those other two impressions that were leading towards that sewing room, towards the stairs. This we have here is we have some motion. Obviously there's been some blood deposition. It's amassed that pool, and we've had something come through and wipe it. And in reviewing the reports, supposedly the victim's son, Cade, I believe his name is, C-A-Y-D, came into the room and slipped and fell. So this would account for this movement of the blood here. If someone were to slip and fall, and envision them slipping and falling, because one of the other things that we look at, many times there's what we refer to as feathering, so we see movement of directionality, moves this way and just slightly bumps this to give us that little, it almost appears to be it does appear to be a small, or it is a small void right there, as that cabinet is moved. This happens number 4, the placard. What is placard number 4? That's a sample of blood that the investigators took, because again, you want to take samples at various locations to show whose blood it is. And then lastly, placard in the back there, number 5, that's where the expended cartridge case, the 22 long, was located.
Previously referred to as a shell casing, that's what you're talking about, correct?
Shell case and cartridge case, yes, sir.
States Exhibit 245, marked in your report as number 29.
So here we have, and let's use that green arrow for reference. That's that footprint, and we can see it's a left foot, and we can see the directionality here is that the big toe as we move around, so we've got the left foot, and it's moving away from the the actual pool here. Interestingly enough, what we don't see is if this foot were to get contaminated, where is the area of, let's just call it a negative impression where they picked up the blood? We don't see that. So normally what happens is, or what we have here is someone had stepped in the blood. Evidence of that is disappeared or is been masked over by the accumulation of blood into this pool here. So any indication, because certainly there's not enough blood here in this satellite spatter to have created the large barefoot impression, someone would have had to step here and to go over in this direction. Also, what we have here is, notice all of these spatter heading out. If you look, you can see the elongated stains. Remember we talked about that before? Tails are going this way. So as that blood is dripping down, we have that drip pattern, drip, drip, drip. So what's happening is that's very low, it's on the floor, correct? So when those spatters are coming out, some of them are coming directly out. So they're, to use the term which might make it easier, they're almost skidding along the floor. So you have those elongated stains. While some of them, as the blood is dripping in, that blood, as it drips in, it comes out and drops over, and you get those circular stains. But for the most part, everything is coming back to here, here, here. And the other thing that we want to look at is, okay, if this is originating here, then we should have something here, which we do. We should have something here, and you can see it in this photograph right there. Some of that spatter is making it all the way out to here. And likewise, when we look at some additional photos, we'll see spatter on the front of this jug or whatever the clay, whatever this is. But again, what we want to do is to show that if I have that type of pattern, this drip pattern, then I should look for and find that radiating spatter coming from that stain. And what it tells me is important is something, and I'm tipping and it makes it difficult to hear, but obviously the blood source is above it. It's above that area and it's dripping into it. So if I'm sitting in the recliner and I back up like this, it's not possible for me to create that drip pattern. The only way that drip pattern could have been created is the source has to be out over that floor to drip down into that pre-existing stain.
So if I understand your testimony correctly, then based on your review of the blood patterns that you're seeing here, the body was in at least two separate positions?
Yes, sir.
And the position of the body in the recliner, you talked about the clots of blood on the shoulder, you talked about the flow patterns down to the base of the recliner, are consistent with Mr. Cooper's body sitting in the recliner?
Yes, sir.
And then you're talking about this parent stain and the satellite stains that are much further out, indicating that the source of blood must come from above, correct?
There has to be obviously a break. It's not flowing down something, otherwise it would flow and just amass, as we saw in that previous photo of that stain amassing in the back of the chair. In this particular case, I have to be above it because, again, all of the spatter, all of that satellite spatter is radiating all the way around, or 360 degrees. So it's dripping into that center, and there's some slight movement, but again, all of those stains are radiating out.
So this isn't coming from Mr. Cooper?
As he's found, no, sir.
Not as he's found, in other words, reclining in the recliner?
In the first officer photographs that we've previously looked at, he was not in that position, no, sir.
And as you indicated previously, there's no flow pattern down his left arm. Why is that relevant to this image here and what you were just talking about?
Sure. It's certainly possible, and again, we have to entertain all possibilities, where if he were, and let's just say unintentionally, Karina Cooper, who we know was on him, picked his arm up only to hold on to him or to embrace him, certainly we want to take a look at his left arm because we know the injury is on his left side. So as I'm sitting there back up against the chair, blood is amassing. Some of it's going to flow down my arm, so it could be possible that as my arm is extended out over the recliner, that it could be dripping off the tip of my finger or fingers, but we don't see that. We actually see his arm clean, and it's actually within the arm of the chair. So again, that's not, and again, look at all of possibilities, his arm wasn't extended out. The most likely position is that, or what is most likely is Mr. Cooper is in this position where he's over the arm of the chair to allow for that dripping to collect and create those satellite spatter.
So if I understand correctly, there's no flow pattern down the arm, so it didn't come from his arm hanging over. Essentially, what you're referring to is this parent stain.
Correct.
And if I understand your testimony, you stated that it's instead the source of the blood above this parent stain would be directly from the wound in his face, on the left side of his face?
Yes, sir.
State's exhibit number 246, your number 30.
So, again, as I mentioned before, when we look at and we do our blood stain analysis, we need to look at the entire scene, right? And if something doesn't make sense, we have to go back. Here we're talking about a drip pattern, so we have blood dripping into blood. We do know that the satellites are going to radiate out, and if you notice here, there's that container that I previously talked about. Notice the spatter. This is the portion that's closest to that drip pattern, so therefore, the most of the predominant number of stains are going to be here, and we can also see that we have some spatter here. So again, everything is corroborating or supporting the fact that that's a drip pattern. Not only that, but that these two jugs or these two containers were there at the time of the event and weren't moved subsequent, because that's not uncommon where someone may try to alter the scene. But certainly, could their positions have slightly moved? Yes. Normally what I do is I would circle this with a Sharpie marker, then I would lift it up, push it off to the side, and I would take a photo of that silhouette just to show either that wasn't moved or it was moved. So there's things you could do. The other important thing to track here is we've seen the footprints on the other side of this rug. The report talked about bloody footprints crossing the rug, but again, or here we have another one of those. In this case, it's a left footprint moving towards that rug. So what we've done, unlike that drip stain at the bottom of the stairs, when you look at the footprints, we can see that the footprints' directionality come from that area by the recliner. The footprints head towards the rug, and then of the photos that I had with the footprints, they come from the rug heading towards the sewing room. So based upon, as I mentioned before, I don't have all of the pieces or all of the photos. It appears that someone tracked blood from the pool or from the side of the recliner, moving this way across the rug and then towards that sewing room.
And you had stated previously that looking at that pool, you didn't see essentially a void or another place that could have sourced essentially the blood from that footprint.
Yes, sir.
What does that tell you about the timing of when that footprint occurred versus the bloodletting event?
So the footprint had to have been, or the foot had to be contaminated with blood prior to that blood amassing over the evidence of the foot being there. So in other words, if I step in the blood, and let's just say I take another step, or as I pick it up, sometimes we'll actually have what's called a negative impression. As I pick the blood up, it's no longer red, it's literally white or lighter because I've lifted the blood on the bottom of my foot. So instead of this red surface, I have this silhouette of a foot, which is lighter in color. I'm not saying white, but it's certainly lighter in color because now I've tracked up or it's contaminated the bottom of my foot and taken a second step. So what we do note is we don't see that within the pool. So again, when we look at timing, that came earlier on, and I can't tell you when, but obviously prior to the blood covering over any evidence of that footprint's origination or the area it came from.
States 247, your 31.
Yes, sir. So again, I mentioned this before. Placard number 5 here is the shell casing or cartridge case, the 22 that was located near the door. Here we have the quilt, the back of the quilt here, the recliner. Notice, remember we talked about this before, if I have a source up here, over, and I have to have a distance for that to drop to hit the floor, an unimpeded drop, right? There's nothing there. Well, as that drops down into this pool, the pool's going to get larger, and you notice all the satellite spatter being created. Likewise, or here I have the edge of the recliner. Granted, if that next droplet hits here, it's going to hit the side of the recliner, which we noticed, and if you follow this across, there comes an area where there's no blood at all. So that actual side of the recliner becomes, if you, for lack of a better term, is a shade. So as that blood drips here, and those satellites hit that, or head in this direction, they actually hit the side of the chair, and that's why we don't see anything here. So again, when we look at this, going back, we have to look at all of these pieces, and the fact that we're behind the chair places something above, dripping down, creating that satellite spatter radiating out all the way over to the wall here, all the way to here.
And again, none of that satellite spatter could be formed by him sitting in a reclining position in the chair.
Oh, no. Some of it could, and again, could be masked over, but that second shot I talked about, but not like this. You might have some fine misting, but I just to say what could have been possible to be part of that pool, but for the most part, that's all due to the drip stain.
States 248, you're 32.
Now, this is the cabinet that I talked about before, where it looked like it may have slightly moved. This is the front door, east wall. What we have here is the door shut. I've circled some representative blood stains. I didn't circle all of the stains, but you can see there's some that spatter, circular stains hitting the wall that have been circled. May I stand, Your Honor? Just for this one.
You may.
I have a green arrow which has been placed in the photograph, and what I'm showing there is the trim board, or depends, some people call it a mop board here, where we can see some additional spatter, and the number of spatter is higher there because it's low. To say that's due, because what happens is it starts to fall back to the ground. So you say, what could be the source of this spatter? Well, if I have a second gunshot wound, that first wound creates that pool, and when I incur, or when the victim incurs that second, that could be some of that back spatter created by light switch, and I think your average light switch is about 38 inches or whatever, about 40 inches above the ground. You wouldn't see this, you wouldn't expect that. So it had to be that we have to create spatter, small little stains like that would be that second shot.
So to be clear, that's not satellite from the drip stain. The blood that we see in States Exhibit 248 marked as your 32 is from another mechanism which you're describing as the second gunshot. And some of that is on the door here that's closed.
Yes, sir.
States Exhibit 249, and that's your 33.
So I've circled, and if you notice, I didn't circle all of the spatter. I tried to, there's another small one there, but trying to show the number of stains, and we can even see at the top here, granted we have this blocking it, but if you notice the height of that spatter, that's not consistent with that drip pattern, because the further you go out and you notice, or you could see from the photographs, this is quite a distance away. And even when you looked at that radiating pattern on the floor, as you looked at the pattern on the floor, when you started to move away, notice how the number of stains started to decrease because they just can't make it out that far. So for these stains to make it up to this level here, and again, I'm not sure how high that switch is, certainly that had to be from another mechanism. And again, the size of the stains, we don't have a scale or a piece of ruler tape here, but certainly they're very small stains. So when you look at the possible mechanisms that are out there, that second gunshot, because here I have that amassed amount of blood, that gases and whatever, or that round when it hits, could cause that spatter to end up on the wall here.
This is your 34. It's States 250.
Yes, sir. This grate here, this is for the air conditioning or the heating, whatever it is, but this was in this position here. It's been taken off and moved off to the side, but what we're looking at is, notice the number of stains here, and there's actually really a break between the stains. This is where that switch was, But if you notice, some of that spatter, that satellite spatter is making its way over. The frequency increases as I get lower along there. So again, that goes along with that drip pattern, but now let's move across here. That drip pattern or that spatter appears here, it appears here and here. So if you recall, that door, at least in that officer body cam, was closed at the time. This certainly here, this spatter on the lower portion of the door, supports the fact that that door was closed at the time of some of that spatter. Not only that, but in the reports that I reviewed, the crime scene investigators or the investigators on scene noted that at the bottom, that's an aluminum door, that's the pump. They refer to that as the pump. They did note, although they didn't photograph, the fact that there was some spatter on there as well.
And just to be clear, we saw earlier that was in fact covered, and this has been moved by the crime scene team.
That vent literally goes back here. This was removed by investigators to take photos of the actual scene itself.
Your number 35, it states 251.
So this is a better view, or actually a view of the door. And notice the circular stains or some elliptical stains, because again, it's going to be coming this way. As we move to the left, that couch, that recliner is actually blocking the path of the blood. So we would anticipate at some point that we're starting to lose that frequency or number of stains as we move to the left. Here we can see one here, we can see a small one here. We can see here. But again, for the most part, they're all very low to the ground here. This appears to be some type of transfer stain, something coming in contact with the door at some particular point. And if you notice, it actually only goes to the base of the door. It doesn't continue. So that gives you some indication that possibly the door was open at some point.
This then would be, your 36 states 252.
Mm-hmm. So this is a photograph taken by investigators. They've placed the number 10 here. But if you look at the photograph, you notice that there are some blood stains on the door here, and they are directed this way. So we have some blood stains, and in the next photograph we see a closer view. But what this tells you is, excuse me, if the door is open, envision this spatter coming out and hitting the door. Remember I talked about that angle? So if blood's coming in at an angle, I wouldn't expect stains on that door to be circular. They should be skidding along the front of the door. So I'd expect these elliptical stains on the front of the door. Not only that, but if you notice, this is I call this the door jamb or the casing. Actually, this is the casing here. I don't see any spatter here because what happens is, and you say, well, if the door is open, why don't I have any blood here? Because think about it, straight line, and this is where photographs become deceiving, because if blood's coming in a straight line, it's going to hit the casing, which we did see in the previous photos, but blood isn't going to come this way, then come around the corner and hit that edge of the door. So I would think, unless there's a transfer stain, which we don't see, but the blood, which we did see in previous photos, we see spatter on that casing, that trim going around the door, which is called casing. We don't see anything here. So going back to looking from all the different views, that drip pattern, everything is making sense that the only way that could have happened is that blood source had to be above the floor, some distance, and I can't tell you, but it was dripping there. Didn't necessarily have to stay in a single position, could be moving, but that's what created that satellite spatter.
Your 37 states 253.
Now this I would call a medium to a close-up range. They've placed the ruler tape or the scale here. This is metric, so it can be a little deceiving, so be careful. Yeah, it is metric. So essentially, even though you see a 2.5 is an inch, 2.54 centimeters. So when you're trying to gauge the size of these, this is roughly an inch, this is roughly an inch. But notice the difference. Remember I talked about that? If the door is open, here I have the door open. If you look at my hand, here if the door is open and the spatter's coming this way, what's it going to do? It's going to skid along the door, and we're going to see these elliptical stains, the elongated stains. So as I look, here I see the elongated stains or elliptical stains, and enunciate the elongated, but notice the tail's going this way. That's pretty evident here, right? All of those tails. Now you say, well, how come this is going this way, this is going this way? Ultimately, that's gravity. Notice how those stains start to radiate out and they start to drop off. Well, those are the stains starting to finally, they lose all of that energy they have. This one here is still going. That's still going across. It's still slightly upward. And what we have here, these are just starting to fall off. But the important thing is the only way that could occur is the door has to be open at the time these stains hit. So while Mr. Cooper is dripping into that pattern, that door is open. I can't tell you how much, because one of the things I did look for was a void on the floor, because if the stains are hitting the door, not only do they hit the side, this is the outside of the door. Now remember, outside, this is outside. On the other side of the door, if you remember, they were circular stains because the door was closed. Well, what we would look for is if that door is positioned over a certain portion of the floor, then it's reasonable to assume that I would have a void or a shadow where the door was. But in looking at the floor, I couldn't determine exactly where the door was. Because could the door have moved slightly a little this way or slightly a little that way? Absolutely. So it wasn't fixed, or at least I couldn't determine that. And now, this is an important photo. Now, in context, this is the edge of the door. Look at the difference of the shape of the stains here. For the most part, they're all circular. So here I have that door. If you look, here's my door here. Is that door is open. That edge of the door is facing what? It's facing that parent pool. As those droplets heading towards the door, they're going to hit the door, and it's straight on. For the most part, they're going to be circular. Now when I go to the side of that door, so here I have that door in position, what I anticipate, and I see somewhat, I do have some stains going. Could that be the door slightly moving? But the majority of these stains, are circular. Notice the frequency increases as I drop down. But if you notice, they're all pretty much circular. Where on that side of the door facing outside, they were all angular stains or elongated. So here's the door open. This happens to hit here. Satellite hits here, it's circle. This one just happens to hit on the outside side, and that's why you get your elliptical. And ultimately, again, some of them are falling off due to gravity. So when you look at it independently, you've got the inside of the door, which tells me the door was closed at some time. This edge of the door, along with the outside of the door, independently tell me that the door was open for a period of time. And again, we can't tell you how long because we don't know the rate of dripping, okay? It was open for some point and then ultimately closed by the time first officers got there.
And originate from Mr. Cooper's body being in a position where it's out over above that parent stain, not where first responders found him sitting reclined in the recliner.
No. No, sir.
No, as in you agree with me and that's correct?
I'm sorry. Yes, I agree with you. No.
Sure.
I apologize. Yes.
Just for the sake of the record. States 255 or 39. What are we seeing here?
Photograph. I was noticing, as I mentioned before, I use Photoshop to enhance process some of the images. At least Photoshop, some things are underexposed or whatever, and I can lighten up those areas to see what's there. Well, in this picture, I made it dark. I made all of the reds dark or dark blue or black. And what we can see, or at least what I was able to determine, is I have three areas. The red, I have a green, and a blue, because I want to differentiate. This is the door right here, and we can see this is the base of the door at the lower portion of the photograph. So that I would call the base of the door. That's the sweep. That's that rubber portion that stops the drafts from coming in. This is the casing. So we're looking straight down. So if the door were to open, the door is going to open this way here. The door is going to open this way here. And what I'm showing is there are two, let's start with the red. There's one footprint. As we've talked about before, there are footprints that show up. This is a bloody footprint, and it's pointing towards the door. It happens to be a right foot. In the green here and in the blue here, there is a footwear impression. In other words, a shoe, or some type of shoe, athletic shoe or whatever it is, some type of shoe with an outsole design created a bloody impression here and a similar impression here.
This is your 40, it states Exhibit 256.
So what you can see here again, we have the red, which is the bloody foot. But if you look here, this is the edge of a shoe here, and we can actually see the diamonds, very similar to what we saw outside. Not only that, but in one of the other photos coming up, you'll be able to see the diamonds. This is the edge of the shoe here. So, and how I can delineate or how I can tell them apart, this is the edge of the shoe, so there's a constant size to it, a strip to it. So that's bloodied and comes in contact with the floor here, likewise here, and then the actual design of the shoe is in here. Likewise, it's back in here as well. And you'll see that when I take the photos of just the green and just the blue area.
And also there with the red square around it, is that,
That's the bloody footprint, yes, sir. That's the right bare foot.
again, oriented towards that door?
Towards the door, yes. This is the door, if I may. This is the base of the door here. This is that oak threshold that you would step on if you open the door. And I refer to this as the sweep or the weather stripping at the base of the door.
Same question that I had for you earlier. We were talking about a footprint that was near the parent stain and the satellite stains. And I asked you about essentially the timing of the formation of that footprint in relation to the blood pool that we were seeing, the drip stains and the satellite stains. Are you able to say anything about the timing of the formation of this particular footprint?
Well, not only this footprint, but also of the other two footwear impressions, that here we have the base in the blue and the green of a shoe which was contaminated with blood. Likewise, we have this barefoot impression here, but we don't see any evidence of where that shoe may have picked up the blood. So we do know that this pool has amassed, so apparently the best explanation is that they were contaminated prior to that pool making its way or enlarging, engulfing whatever evidence may have been there, or any indication of that's where the shoe, in this case, or the footprint was contaminated or picked up blood.
And Judge, this may be a good time to break for lunch.
Yeah, we're right at noon, so ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our lunch break at this point, so I ask that you be back here ready to go at 1:30. And again, I would just remind you of the admonition, just again, keep an open mind, don't talk to anybody about the case, don't let anybody talk to you about the case, don't do any sort of investigation or research on your own, and avoid any and all media accounts, including traditional and social media, as it relates to this case. So with that, I hope you all have a good lunch.
Let's hang out for just a second. Er, There's nothing outside the presence of the jury.
Anything for me at this point before we take our break?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then have a good lunch.
Okay, guys, that is it for today because I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon. What we're going to do in the morning is instead of doing Phil Spector, we're going to do the afternoon session in the morning. So at 8 o'clock, we're going to start with the afternoon session and then we're going to go through and do everything tomorrow. So if you watch it without me, That's fine. Won't hurt my feelings a bit. Um, but if you watch it again with us in the morning, please no spoilers. That's all I ask. Just please no spoilers. I doubt it's going to be anything exciting because I have a feeling this is all going to be this guy today. I don't think it's going to be anything earth shattering. I think we're going to be all blood spatter all day. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today and watching um our wonderful, very learned blood spatter expert, but very boring. Um, but like I always say, we're gavel to gavel here, whole 9 yards. Take the good with the bad, because this is what happens when you're on a jury. So, so I will see you guys in the morning at 8 o'clock. This is just a checkup with my pain management doctor to make sure that my nerve block is still working and I'm still able to walk and all that good stuff. So it's not a big deal, but I still have to go do it. So I will see you guys at 8 in the morning. Again, I love and appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for hanging out with me. And remember, be kind to people, love your family, and Jesus loves you, and so do I. Bye, guys. Have a great evening. I will see you in the morning.